Since the mule's been appearing in Gale's dreams for a while now, I guess the opening scene on Calgan serves as our formal introduction to the mule. In case you haven't been following things too closely, the role was recast, so it's Pilou Asbæk, who you might remember from Game of Thrones, who we meet alone and unarmed on the battlefield. He does have intro music though, which is cool. As he emerges from the tree line, they hear an instrument called a Visi sonar playing in the background, which the commander says is played by his balladeer, whom he describes as a clown who, you know, just hangs out and plays music to herald his arrival. I suppose if you're going to show up on a battlefield without a fleet or army, that's the way to do it. The mule has taken Archduke Balerian's daughter hostage and would like to have the Pleasure Planet handed over to him in exchange for her release. The Archduke explains this wouldn't be possible because Calgon is an independent buffer state between the Imperium and the Foundation, and any act of aggression would be met with a military response from both. To this, the mule makes his intentions plain through a very specific choice of words, saying he intends to consume the Imperium along with the Foundation. Apparently, he has a large appetite, one that only a galaxy can satisfy, and in a brief but convincing exchange that he bookends with the phrase "nothing drastic," he explains why he doesn't need an army to make that a reality. He can worm his way into people's minds to make them do what he wants. And if the fleet and army destroying themselves wasn't enough to convince you, then surely the Archduke biting off his own finger to present the mule with his signet ring should do the trick. Mule 1, everyone else 0, and as formal introductions go, I think this is quite effective. While the coming crisis that will result from that is on their doorstep, the Empire still needs to carry on with business as usual. Since Brother Day is unavoidably occupied, and Brother Dusk is spending his days watching footage of previous Cleons' final moments at their ascension ceremonies, this responsibility falls on Brother Dawn, who seems to be the right guy for the job, honestly. He's only 10 days away from his ascension to the center throne, so it makes sense in that regard, but it's also evident that he relishes the opportunity, that he's driven in a way that we hadn't seen in previous exponents. He shows up as the representative at a Galactic Council meeting and looks impressive, as is the location where they have these things. Clarion Station is a massive man-made cylinder that rotates to create its own gravity, which I guess they use since it would be a neutral space rather than having their headquarters on a particular member planet or what have you. Dawn handles his duties. Later, we'll learn that he even staged a protest outside to help reinforce his points, and it all works to get the desired outcome. It's funny because when you first hear them, his assertions about the Foundation's corruption and greed sound like they'd be fake news drummed up by an empire on its back foot, but later we learn they're true. This blurs the lines between the good guys and the bad guys while also introducing a third faction, whom he refers to as the Merchant Princes. I wouldn't say the line of who falls where inside the Foundation split are clearly defined in this episode. Empire is supplying arms to a group that's led by a character named Randu Mallow, whose last name indicates is the descendant of the traitor Hober Mallow, who played an essential role in Vault Harry's plan last season. Randu's taking weapons from the Empire leads to the new character Han Pritcher calling him a traitor. But Han is working for the mayor, whose office Ebling Miz will tell Harry later has devolved into being more like a monarchy. Their roles will likely come into focus as things progress, but for now a rundown of the new character seems in order. Han Pritcher is the mayor of New Terminus's captain of information, which sounds like his head spy. He's presented as an action hero type whose ability to get things done in intense situations seems to attract the ladies. While his suspicions that the Empire was providing weapons to the Merchant Princes were confirmed, he failed to bring back the evidence to prove it. And when his partner on the job suggests that some heat blister sex might help them get over the harsh feelings of coming up short, he grabs a pendant that he's wearing around his neck and holds on to it while telling her his loyalties lie elsewhere. I won't get into details since I'm not sure how many people watching this consider trailers spoilers, but this connects some dots shots from the official trailer, even if it doesn't clear up the confusion I mentioned in my video where I broke that down. He was on Haven, the planet whose orientation with its sun makes it 260 degrees on one side, compared to negative 180 degrees on the other, which I'm not sure if that's a hard science fiction scenario. I guess it could be if it was tidally locked and one side was always facing away from the heat source, but the shadow of its moon moving around on the sun side makes for a high-stakes chase scene that couldn't exist otherwise. Han was there pursuing the traitors, who his boss, Mayor Inber, worries could be pulling the Foundation into civil war. Han believes the mule is the true existential threat they should be focusing on. But with the vault about to open, the mayor doesn't want to get involved with something that could lead to an intergalactic incident over hearsay about an independent planet in the middle band. In a short scene, we get a sense of what Ebling meant when he referred to the mayors as little lords. We don't learn much, but the mayor seems to represent what Ignis Harry explained to Salvor last season. If left unchecked, the First Foundation would eventually become something like the Empire. We see more of this when Ambassador Quent visits Terminus, where she seems right at home trading jabs with Brother Dusk. Besides Han, who might have more going on than meets the eye, Dr. Ebling Miss appears to be the other Foundationer who is dedicated to the larger project of recreating society so that the Dark Ages Harry predicted can be shortened. If he looks familiar, that's because the actor appeared playing a different role in the first episode of the series. After he nulls the null field, which according to Harry is something no one has ever been able to do before, he explains that he's a descendant of Prosecutor Xylus, who helped get Selden exiled under Cleon XII's rule. Since I've already mentioned Game of Thrones, I should add that he also played Doran Martell in the show. And while we're back on the topic, the presider at the Galactic Council, who Dawn subtly threatens with Sirio Farrell, Arya's water dancing instructor from GOT as well. Ebling describes himself as Harry's biographer and a self-taught psychohistorian who believes he is the man best suited to assist in the upcoming manifestation. His work on the null field earns him an audience and a trip inside the vault, where Harry mostly disregards the things he says. He confirms that the Foundation has moved past its religious phase, succeeded by an ever-expanding worship of trade. Additionally, the split between the merchant princes and the ruling elite, which is when Ebling mentions that it's starting to resemble a monarchy. He makes the point that the Foundation has become comfortable and wonders if they're still capable of facing the coming crisis, which he thinks is the traitors. Harry can't confirm or deny this, and Ebling understands it would corrupt the system. Although we know it's the mule, so this back and forth is more about establishing the current state of affairs inside the Foundation. When Ebling tries to give him a heads up that the Empire is holding up better than was initially projected, Harry rocks his world by telling him he gave them the Prime Radiant. While he's dealing with the dissonance, Harry assures him he doesn't need to understand. In 3 days, he'll emerge from the vault and the chips will fall where they may. When he tries to question him about the Radiant again, he finds himself outside with all of the equipment he used to bypass the null field destroyed in a pile inside it. While all the introductions and table setting are necessary and compelling for the most part, as is usually the case, the most interesting bits from the premiere come from Demerzel and Brother Day. I've hinted that this season's Day has holed himself up to get high with his girlfriend, and that's all he seems to be up to when Brother Dusk comes looking for him. That and creating clones of extinct animals to inspire his poetry, I guess. Oh, and consuming munchies that resemble what you'd get if you searched for snacks popular in Mediterranean countries or something along those lines. This is all amusing, but it also loops back to the idea that each Cleon who takes the throne wonders if they might be the last. This is the way this exponent copes with that reality, which I think is the most interesting development for the clones this season, and something that will come up again when we get to Demerzel. Demerzel. His companion's name is Song, and she's from Mycogen, which is on the lower levels of Trantor, level 88, and known for growing microfoods. This is an interesting detail for those of us who read Asimov's prequel books, since it's a place Harry Seldon spends some time at in those. But hearing Dave bring it up adds some needed context to some of the shots we see of him in the trailers, which again, I won't get into the details because of spoilers, but if you puzzled over some of those shots, I'm sure you can follow what I'm getting at. Anyway, he seems to be enjoying himself in Song's company, and the drugs she seems to be providing him from Mycogen, which he seems to inhale. I think we only see him take one hit in this sequence, but he's clearly been doing them around the clock for at least the last 6 months. Still, he has his wits about him. His line about leaning into indignity is an instant classic, and although he gives Dusk a hard time, he does eventually make his way to the palace to see what Demerzel has to show them. That's when she explains that things are worse than they initially thought, before the focus shifts to Gale waking up on Ignis to end the episode. Demerzel's talking about the end of civilization, and specifically the extinction of humanity has added weight because of her scene with the first luminous Zephyr she worked hard to get installed on Trantor. For a fun casting fact, the actor who portrays her is the real-life daughter of the actor who played the Archduke in the opening Mule sequence. This is set up as a situation similar to the one the Cleons have at Gossamer Court, where Demerzel can go through a process of unburdening in the grove on the Imperial Palace grounds, and then wipe the Zephyr's memory so that she can't carry their conversation with her when she leaves. When she returns, the memories will be restored for their following conversation, but then wiped again. She's basically doing the opposite of what Day is doing with Song. In her case, the extra precautions seem necessary, since the first bombshell she drops is that she's a positronic robot rather than a human. By itself, that might not seem like a big deal since Queen Zeroth figured it out last season, but when she starts to get into the specifics of her situation, and you take into account that her kind is otherwise banned in the current Imperium, as in she's the last remaining robot that we've seen so far, well, just think about how Dusk 16 and Rue's story ended last season. As someone who's read all of the Foundation and Robot series books, some exciting details stand out here that I can't get into without spoiling things. What's nice about this scene is that it works even if you haven't read them, because she delivers a great explanation of the laws of robotics. While these concepts are familiar to most people and I've discussed them in previous videos, I believe a brief overview is still warranted here. As Demerzel explains to Zephyr Varellis, the first law of robotics coincides with the primary concern of anyone who creates artificial life, that their creation can't hurt them. The first law is that a robot can't injure a human being or allow harm to come to them through inaction. With that out of the way, the next most important thing is for robots to follow their orders. So the second law is that a robot must do that unless the order conflicts with the first law. In other words, you can't order a robot to harm a human. The third and final law, as Asimov initially introduced them, was that robots must protect themselves as long as that didn't conflict with the other laws. So the laws are relatively straightforward and not particularly groundbreaking, but the way they're put together and structured around conflicts creates a ton of interesting scenarios to contemplate. That's essentially what all the original robot short stories are about. This becomes even more interesting when you introduce the Zeroth law, and to the show's credit, Demerzel's current situation due to Cleon's additional law to serve the Empire. The Zeroth law supersedes the other three and adds that no machine may harm humanity, or through inaction allow humanity to come to harm. While there are many ways to stress the original three laws, determining whether something would harm humanity as a whole is much more complicated than harming an individual human. As Demerzel states here, some robots couldn't metabolize this new programming, but those that could realized it would take something drastic to ensure humanity's survival. It turns out we're not great at helping in this endeavor. She says we seem to want extinction, and they couldn't let that happen, not even through inaction, which brings us back to what she tells the exponents at the end. Then she says that the robots went to war with each other over what to do with humanity, as a direct result of the Zeroth law, which could be somewhat surprising if you believe the story Brother Dusk told Rue last season. The idea that robots fought against humans for their personhood and were able to circumvent the first law never really made sense. Not in a story that adhered to Asimov's ideas about robots, as David Goyer told me himself that the show was definitely trying to do. But at the same time, if you hadn't read the books, the show didn't give you much else to go on. So I point that out to say this is something you should pay attention to. Especially since 16's story mentioned a robot killing Emperor Benephos as the start of the conflict, and Demerzel says a robot killing an important man in service of the Zeroth law sealed the robot's fate. And remember how their little lesson on the laws started. Demerzel proposed the thought experiment after Varellis asked how she was able to fight, considering robots were designed to be unable to harm humans. I expect them to expand on this. Demerzel indicated they'd meet again when she was explaining the memory wipe, and only scratched the surface concerning the Zeroth law and how Cleon's law and the conflicts inherent in that drive her decisions. For now, we have some interesting backstory about the war and the location where they meet, which is something Harry mentioned to Gale back in the second episode of the series when they were talking by the apple trees on the Deliverance. The tree they sit by for the unburdening is the last one left from an orchard where humans who supported the robots were executed. The apples are poisonous to people and have a golden color because so many robots were destroyed there that liquid iridium from their bodies seeped into the soil and contaminated it. Beyond the big picture stuff, we find out that the reason Demerzel is going through with the unburdening now is because of the Prime Radiant. It's like the apple she can't eat. For years it's been showing her the fall of the empire she's bound to protect, causing her to live in paradox. So why did Harry give it to her? She reckons it's because knowing the end of the empire is one thing, but holding it in your hands is another. It's indisputable on some level, but even that hasn't changed her directive. She still loves the Cleons and can't do anything about it, which leaves her with the question of what she'll do when their dynasty inevitably ends. Luminism is about rebirth, but what does that mean for a construct that doesn't die? What happens when she outlives her programming? It's hard to say, and they leave things with her confessing that she doesn't know who she is without Empire. In the second episode, Brother Dusk, who is also struggling with the reality that his time is almost up, says that when presented with the coming end of civilization, he finally thinks he understands what it's like to be Demerzel. If there is ash in his mouth at the end of a brief pointless life, then she must be tasting bile in her long pointless one. Of course, he has no way of knowing what we do, that even though her stint as Cleon the First's forever empress has been a long one, lasting thousands of years if you include her time as a prisoner below the palace, it's kind of a drop in the bucket for a construct that's essentially immortal. Shepherding the genetic dynasty has been a diversion from her real directive, the zeroth law, which prioritizes the success of humanity as a whole over the fate of any individual. As the show has pointed out, her current directive raises a lot of questions in light of the fact that the end of the dynasty is approaching. But one of the things I like about Season 3 is that it's created a situation that's much worse than that. Because now the Radiant is showing that in 4 months, it's not just the Empire, but all of humanity that's coming to an end. Dusk jokes that after the fall of the dynasty, she's just a girl with the open road before her. But that road leads directly to one specific place, and that's nowhere. Or as Day would say, nothingness. Kiss the void, gentlemen. Given the gravity of the situation, she's amazingly composed. She spends her time in the orchard, calmly unburdening herself, and explains the coming catastrophe in clear terms to her current stable of exponents while shrugging off Day's verbal assault. All that Dusk does in this episode serves to illustrate the opposite strategy. He makes his appeal for more time to Demerzel first, and when that doesn't work out, goes to Day. One of the things I had been thinking about, and something I noticed in the comments of my episode 1 video, was that the ages for Ascension seemed off. I figured this was because they went into the season planning on utilizing Cassian Bilton as a young Day to switch things up, but I wasn't sure if there was more going on. Terrence Mann didn't appear to be as aged up as he had been in the past right before his character became Brother Darkness, and they even showed him watching old footage of their ascensions, which drew attention to it. In episode 2, they addressed this directly when he was making his case to extend his life, which Can you blame him? You find out the end of the world is coming, which is a pretty big event, but you're gonna miss it because you're scheduled for euthanization in 10 days. It's a bum deal for sure. But anyway, the genetic drift causes them to lose their faculties a little earlier than they had previously. So at some point, a Brother Day changed things up to shorten their lifespan. After Demerzel's assertion that she's a clock and the time she keeps is exact, so there will be no altering of the schedule, and Brother Day's dramatic reminder that they have nanites in their bloodstreams that make them nearly indestructible, Brother Dusk reveals that he doesn't plan to retire quietly. If no one will grant him a reprieve and let him tack on a few extra months to the end of his life to stick around for the end of everything, he's shifted his focus on working on a little surprise. According to its creator, the Novacula is a first-of-its-kind black hole bomb. If you look past his embellishments, the technical details here probably add up enough for this thing to make sense and amount to the Empire having a new planet killer weapon. I guess I can see why this exponent might think this was a good idea, but the first thing I thought about when I saw this thing was the scene of the mule turning the Archduke's fleet on itself and trying to give his side an advantage in the coming conflict. Did he just hand his enemy the tool they needed to end civilization? And wouldn't that be fitting? In his quest to live forever, the First started the dynasty and used her programming to lock Demerzel in so that she had to see it through to the end no matter what. As Day tells Song elsewhere in the episode, Harry Seldon arrived to point out that they were driving themselves over a cliff, so they extend the cliff, but keep driving straight into creating a new technology that will not only expedite the process, but also bring everyone else along with them. Not Day himself, mind you. He spent the majority of this episode checking out, puffing on his spore hitter. In the same conversation with Song, he tells her he's made peace with the end, but he doesn't want to sit around on the surface waiting for it to happen. He wants to travel to the lower levels to visit Mycogen, where she and her wonderful drugs come from, which is what I think is going on in his other scene. In my notes for that, I had Brother Day is gambling away family heirlooms while inhaling spores. He uses the ferret that they drew attention to in the premiere to cheat, to lose, ? Usually when you cheat in a card game, you do it so you can win, which I suppose reinforces what we already know. The Cleons don't need money like that. However, it also presents the question of why go through the trouble then? Why make the ferret an accomplice if you aren't trying to win the game? To me, that's proof that he wasn't. He was making sure he'd lose, possibly in a convincing manner, and at first I thought he might just be trying to help out since it was revealed that his bodyguard or security officer has a sick child who doesn't have long to live. Well, that might be a factor. What makes the most sense to me is that Day is trying to get this guy in a position where he has to help him with his plan to slip away into the lower levels. So since that's probably not a plan Demerzel would get behind, we'll have to wait and see. They make a point of showing Day's distaste for Demerzel every chance they get. A complete 180 from 17's relationship with her last season. But this plan to escape seems to fit into a larger trend with this group of exponents who for some reason think that they can do these big things behind Demerzel's back. Is there any way that Dusk could divert the resources necessary for his planet killer, hire the scientists, and set up the lab, not to mention the construction and implementation, without Demerzel knowing? She says that for years there have been shadows in the math, which is the name of the episode, and could be referring to this black hole doom machine, but it's not the only candidate, because even though big picture things are becoming much clearer with each new installment, there are also a lot of unknowns lurking around the periphery. You also have Callie's return, and Harry mentioning the Invictus, which I'll be circling back to both of those things. But as far as the superweapon is concerned, I'm guessing Demerzel knows about it even if she's not letting on. The same goes for Dawn's covert call to Gale at the end as well. So I'm curious to see where they're going with everyone on the Empire side sneaking around doing their own thing, and what Demerzel letting that happen says about her plans. But as Day disregards his legacy and Dusk tries to ensure his with one foot in the grave, again Dawn presents as the reasonable one as he prepares to take the center throne. Teaming up with Gale is probably not a bad idea given the stakes, but I do wonder how this has been presented to him, since it's not likely she would be like, hey, so we've got this secret second foundation going and could use your help. The premiere ended with Gale waking up in the present on Ignis, but episode 2 rolled back the clock somewhat to open with her and Harry waking up from their first sleep cycle, which they started at the end of season 2. The remnants of Tellum's Mentalics are there to greet them, with Thalos serving as their representative, stepping into the role of the first speaker. With the plan wildly off track, they've got a lot to do. Initially, they kept their original plan of waking up for a few weeks every year so that Harry could teach the Mentalics about psychohistory, and Gale could show them how to harness their powers to fight the mule. While they were asleep, the second Foundationers would continue to train and seek out other Mentalics to grow their numbers. As time progressed, they spread out until they had eyes and ears in every part of the galaxy, working in the shadows to ensure the first Foundation grew strong while the Empire weakened according to the initial trajectory of the plan. And this would explain how Gale would have things in place to reach out to Brother Dawn. Things were going well, but as the years passed, they found themselves facing a familiar problem that kept recurring in this episode. They were running out of time. Time was the one factor they couldn't control. With 50 years left before the mule arrived, Harry became convinced that they wouldn't be ready in time. While Gale's focus is on his arrival, that's not what Harry's worried about. He says the third crisis was always the turning point, implying that there's more going on. Even if they defeat the mule, they won't be ready for what comes after if they don't have everything in precisely the right place. And since they aren't catching up fast enough, one of them has to stay awake. Gale doesn't like it, but it makes more sense for Harry to do it so that she can sleep until it's time for her to face the mule. She goes back into the cryo chamber expecting to wake up in a year, but Harry forgoes that altogether. It skips ahead to 4 years ago, and she meets the new first speaker, Preem Pulver, and finds out she's been asleep for decades. She's reunited with the Harry who's become ancient in her absence, and once she gets over her initial anger at being cut out of the decision-making process, he gets her up to speed. He activates the Radiant in a slightly different way than we're used to seeing, and shows her everything he knows about the 8 crises, all his data, thoughts, and secrets. Somewhat surprisingly, he says what's most important is the Invictus, saying that if the mule is defeated, this is where everything is headed. It's a little vague initially, but if you look at the info inside the Radiant that Gale is looking at when he says I'll see you tomorrow, you can see the words lifeform detected and Andromeda floating there, which appear to connect back to the term exo being scrawled in blood on the bridge of the Invictus when Salver and the others first got inside there back in season 1. As she said there, exo means outside or external, and the Andromeda galaxy is the nearest major galaxy to ours, the Milky Way. This all points to an alien threat, which is significant in terms of psychohistory since it's a science built on the premise that human behavior can be statistically analyzed and predicted on a galactic scale. Remove humans from the equation and substitute them with a civilization that might be driven by different motivations behind its actions, and the whole thing falls apart. He ends the conversation saying he'll see her tomorrow, but he won't. While the formation of the Second Foundation and the introduction of Preem Pulver and the mention of the Invictus all piqued my interest, things got really exciting for me when he returned to his room to find Callie waiting for him. Because this and the introduction of the zeroth law in the last episode are setting things up for the endgame of the series. I'm not sure we'll ever get there, but they're putting the pieces in place. The future of the TV show isn't any more set in stone than Psychohistory's predictions. There were some pretty big shakeups while they were filming season 3, with David S. Goyer leaving the showrunner role. While they found a replacement and are working on a 4th, the things these scenes are hinting at would take longer than that to get to. Without getting into spoilers, I'll just say what's refreshing here is the alignment with Asimov's big ideas and leave it at that. The show is definitely a remix of the story, but the argument that it's not Foundation or not following the core ideas Asimov was exploring in all 7 of the Foundation novels he published, that's a much harder argument to make based on the first 2 episodes of season 3. Calais is waiting for him though, and calls him out for not being truthful with Gale in their final conversation. He couldn't do it, he couldn't look her in the face and say goodbye. She checks to see if Harry's sure about his decision, adding that there'd be grace in dying on Ignis. He pulls a brother Dusk and makes a final plea to have her take him back to Una's world and give him another reprieve. I guess it's been a while since Callie last showed up, so if you need a refresher, remember that she's the mysterious entity that first appeared to him when he was trapped in the Prime Radiant in the premiere of Season 2. She, or it, took the form of his wife Yana first, and then the mathematician Callie, because these were things familiar to him. It then manifested in the physical world on the deserted mining planet it diverted him to on the way to Ignis, giving him the body he's been walking around in ever since. So he requests another one, and she turns him down, saying this body was his reprieve and he did all he could while he had it. That being the case, he's certain he wants to go with her. He wants to go where she's from, ? So she activates a portal, ? They walk over to it and he says no spacers, no whisper drive, no jump gate. How? And she responds that if he comes with her, she'll show him. If you've read the books, you probably have an idea of where she might be taking him. But if you haven't, the language here is a nice way to clarify that it's an actual place in the galaxy. He's talking about faster than light space travel, not crossing over to the other side or taking him to heaven or whatever. Losing another Harry is kind of sad, but the most interesting thing here is when he brings up what Salvor said to him last season about someone wanting him to have skin in the game. She was talking about this body he came across on their trip. When he asked Callie why they wanted him to have skin in the game, she says, because we can't. And you can guess that will turn out to be important in putting things together down the road. The next day, Gale realizes he's gone. She tells Preem that he didn't say goodbye, but she felt him leave. The first speaker doesn't speak, and Gale hasn't learned sign language yet, so there's some strangeness involved, but they do get to share a moment when she brings up the statues Harry showed her earlier in the episode. He made them for Yana, Rach, and Salvor, saying it was how he remembered the past these days. Gale tried to explain to Preem that she wanted to make one for him, and they ended up laughing together when she realized he would have already made one for himself. She eventually learns to sign and the plan gets back on track. When she wakes up in the present, that's when you hear her say, "The mule is here, we're out of time," which was repeated in a lot of the trailers. When she meets with the first speaker, he reinforces the need for the second foundation and points out how all their work has brought the plan back on track. The third crisis is unfolding exactly as it's supposed to, but then he points out that Calgon is something else. The moment the mule took it, they started seeing the same thing in the Radiant that Demerzel showed the clones in the last episode. But it cuts away before we get to hear what the second foundation thinks is happening. The mule is using his time to secure his control over Calgon. There we see a more down-to-earth demonstration of his powers as he explains conversion to his new security forces. This involves the Archduke's daughter Skirlet. That's the Calgonese name her father called her anyway, which means little bread roll, which is cute like she is, which injects some tension into the scene as it becomes clear that she'll do anything he says. And he tells her to put her father's gun to her head. All with a smile, nothing hectic, just a little nudge. And to drive it all home, he uses one of the officers as a second example, having her complete the countdown to little bread roll pulling the trigger, which she does, but then the gun doesn't go off. So he follows it up asking if they think he's a monster before saying that they'll all come to love him, as will the rest of the galaxy. While all of this is an effective way to show how the mule operates, I thought the most interesting mule tidbit came in the voiceover when Gale said he had a way of pulling everyone into his orbit one way or another, as his ship the Black Tongue blacked out the sun above the new characters Beta and Torin Mallow. These two are newlyweds on their honeymoon, and their choice to spend it on Calgon does more to explain how it got its reputation as a pleasure planet than the battlefield scene in the last episode did. The timing didn't turn out to be great, or was it? Because as Torin says, Aku is a place to be seen, apparently. They have some trust fund baby vibes, but otherwise seem fun. They're also descendants of Hober Mallow. Torin's uncle was the traitor who was dealing with the Empire on Haven in the last episode. From their conversation, you get the sense that they're not too heavily involved in politics. Gale tells us directly that Torin wants nothing to do with the traitors or the coming crisis, but there seems to be some desire to be recognized by his uncle, which doesn't seem to be happening based on Beta's comments. If nothing else, they are up for an adventure. So when Han shows up to recruit them to help him get close to the mule, they aren't that hard to convince. You see them creating scatters, using futuristic cameras to create content. They appear to be something like influencers, for lack of a better term. Han calls them beloved galactic personalities when he makes his pitch for help. He nudges them by calling them out for being too rich to be scared, too callow, too complicit. He gets a reaction when he introduces the idea that their association with the traitors would help cover up for the mayor and the rest of the Foundation leadership. That seems to spice things up a bit, and I should say that I enjoyed the intelligence officer side of the Han character here more than the speeder bike action hero bits. The point of it all is that the mule is hard to get to, but he's having a party that they'll be invited to. While you would expect a normal pirate who just cooed a planet to lie low, Han says the mule has something to prove and enjoys his vices. Plus, as we know, he's a lot more potent than the average pirate, so in his case, he wouldn't see a reason to hide out necessarily. Beta and Torin are based on major characters from the books, and you can see here how they are in a position to serve as an entry point into the mule's world from the first Foundation side of things. For now, that world is just Calgon, but if you think back to when Gale went into the future for their first confrontation last season, when she returned, she said most of the galaxy had fallen at his feet. Episode 3 opens with a flashback to fill in some details that provide needed context about the call he received at the end of episode 2. Based on the comments of my video about that one, there was some confusion about what was happening there. Was this the first time they talked? Was it really Gale? Maybe it was someone else, the mule, or even Demerzel? None of these questions occurred to me because of the communication device. He had it hidden away, which made me think he knew it was Gale calling and that they'd talked this way before. But it was somewhat challenging to make sense of how that happened. The answer is that 3 years ago, Dawn went to the Imperial Library to research psychohistory. More specifically, he asked about Calais' ninth proof of folding because he understood that to be a bedrock inspiration. Later, we'll learn his interest comes from seeing Demerzel fire up the Prime Radiant when he was a kid. Seeing the math move around was like the language of angels. This particular request is something the librarian was prepared for, although she wasn't expecting to have it come from the future ruler of the Galactic Empire. So after she enlightens us with the fun fact that gloves actually do more damage to ancient texts than handling them with your bare hands, and after Dawn notices that the texts are the originals, which doesn't make sense because Harry Seldon took those from the library and gave them to Gale back in season 1, she then took them with her on the Deliverance, but she never made it to Terminus. When pressed on how these volumes made it back to the library, the librarian explains there's an interesting story about that, but she's not the one to tell it. Instead, she gives him the details for a meeting with the person who can. Presumably because of the face scrambler shenanigans that Dawn and Queen Zeroth got up to last season. Those are tracked across Trantor now, so he slips into a disguise and heads to the designated tea shop. Gale appears at the table across from him while he's distracted by a sound in the back, and he's shocked to see this person he was familiar with from watching videos of Harry Seldon's trial 321 years ago. The lengths he went to put together the disguise signal to her that he had put some thought into this excursion, and she points out the trend in how Dawn the 14th tried to run away with the gardener Azora, and how the 18th did run away with Zeroth and their unborn child. He initially refers to them as traitors and deserters, but he doesn't sound very convincing. Gale seizes the opportunity to say that they were just men who started to think for themselves, and that strikes a chord. All she has to do to reel him in from there is to offer to be an escape hatch, which, going back to the 14th and 18th, is something we know Cleon tends to look for at this phase of his life before he becomes Brother Day. She blinks out to remind us that they have a tech advantage over Empire. It's kind of funny thinking about Dawn in his room collecting hair from his brush or whatever to make his fake goatee, while Gale can just convincingly be in a conversation with him without actually being on the planet. This first part also serves as a nice primer on how the Second Foundation operates. As I've already mentioned, this wasn't intended to snag a Cleon. It was an artifact tucked away in the hopes that it might attract like-minded individuals or other mentalics, with an agent on site at the Empire's core to point promising candidates in the right direction. Gale showed up prepared to use everything that's known about the dynasty to her advantage, so it's not a surprise that she would be able to form this shadow alliance. From there, it connects back to the call from the end of the last episode. We see that he receives a cryptic message stating that the vault is awake before he gets the call on the device he has hidden in his room. I feel like the additional context does away with the idea that any trickery is happening here. And I'm addressing that directly because I saw that when they released a clip of this conversation as a preview for episode 3, people on Reddit were commenting that they didn't think it was really Gale. As far as I'm concerned, after watching the episode in its entirety, that shouldn't be a question anymore. In their back and forth, she handles Dawn some, and he seems to be into it, if for no other reason than she keeps impressing him. He's lived his whole life with the Radiant, which has all this predictive power but missed the mule. She brought him up 3 years ago when they first met, so he's down to help out, but isn't sure he can pull off what she's asking. She wants him to set up an enclosure to confine the mule on Calgon, and for something like that, which would involve a fleet action, he needs approval from the council. She urges him to try because she doesn't think the mule will be isolated like this for very long, and then warns him to only meet by holo because the rumors that he can control people's minds are true. This is on full display when Han uses Torin and Beta's clout to get him into the mule's party on Calgon. He tells them to warn him if they see a weapon, but otherwise to keep a low profile, which isn't something that comes naturally to them. Throughout their conversation, the balladeer is playing his Visi sonar, entertaining the crowd in the background. I really like Torin saying, "Why isn't anyone looking at us?" which Han attributed to the music, which he says feels hypnotic, with Beta backing him up saying the sound sort of gets into you, which makes you think about how he was playing when the mule arrived on the battlefield in the premiere. As far as these kinds of things go, the club scene is impressive. These are crowd scenes full of distinct background characters inhabiting a world, a galaxy that looks completely fleshed out and lived in. You even have little Breadroll there holding things down with his entourage. As I mentioned in my trailer breakdown, this isn't how I imagined any of this looking when I first read the book, but credit where credit's due for the show's world building. Things immediately go south for Han, who is revealed to be a mentalic himself when he gets too close to the mule. He grabs hold of Han's mind, saying, "You're like me. Who is Gale Dornick?" The implication here has to be that Han is a double agent for the Second Foundation. He's one of the mentalics they sent out to be their eyes and ears in the galaxy, and positioned himself in a prominent role in the First Foundation's intelligence apparatus. With all the jumping around in time, it gets a little hard to follow, but it seems like this is when the mule discovers Gale exists. The flashback she saw when she first jumped ahead in time looking for him, where we see him grabbing her by the neck and yelling about the Second Foundation's location, comes later in the conflict. This experience is overwhelming for Han and he has to leave, and then we see the balladeer, who we learn is named Magnifico Giganticus, finish his performance. Before you roll your eyes at that, let me point out that this came straight from Isaac Asimov. The name isn't something the show made up. Magnifico is a whole thing, and from this brief introduction, you should be starting to sense that. When the Mallows notice that the mule is abusive towards him, Beta gets an idea. In a relatively small sample of lines, this character's distinguished herself through some colorful but also calibrated line deliveries. She drops another one here saying that this particular mule has been roughing her flanks ever since he stole their sunshine, and she'd be happy to steal a little bit of his. She sees Magnifico as a potential way in, but doesn't want the mule to see her talking to him. Torin figures a man who conquers a planet and throws a party wants to be infamous at least. And if the mule cares about fame at all, he's definitely going to want to meet someone like him. All it should take is a little charm and some liquor. This ties back to what Han said in the last episode and their nonchalance in referring to the coup. The jackboots are going to be coming down on someone else's neck. So why not take your camera drones over to the guy who just took over the planet for some drinks and laughs? It turns out that the mule doesn't partake in Foundation's version of social media, but I guess his giant bodyguard does because he assures him Torin is famous. That's enough to smooth over the rough start, which provided my favorite mule musing when he finished Torin's statement that he has a sort of demeanor that some people can find, with the mule adding demeaning. Then he decides to stick with the insults theme, suggesting that they follow the tradition he has on his planet called flighting. I wasn't exactly sure what he was talking about, so I looked it up to learn that it's essentially the medieval equivalent of a rap battle, or as it's described on the Wikipedia page, a contest consisting of the exchange of insults between two parties, often conducted in verse. So yeah, a rap battle. The poetic exchange of insults was practiced mainly between the 5th and 16th centuries, and Torin quickly picks up on it. The mule seems pleased to be insulted until things take a turn. As a distraction, it's effective, and we see Beta apply her charm to the balladeer. At the same time, the mule tells Torin that his insults were misguided because he was operating under the assumption that his designs were small. He doesn't just want Calgon, he's coming for the Foundation and the Empire. In short, he wants everything and plans to get it. To drive this home, he makes the influencer use a peeler to do a self-flaying on his palm. And when he tries to protest, the mule assures him that he'll eventually change his mind and plead with him to let him give him more of his skin. When he asks if he's ready to like it, you tend to believe him that it would happen. But when Torin sees that Beta is finished with her mission, he uses his camera bots to create a distraction with their flashes so he can get away. On the way to their ship, he finds out that Beta has brought Magnifico along for the ride, and it's a good thing they're rich enough to have a whisper ship of their own, because being able to jump is what saved them. Based on the way that he accepted the drink from the ship's AI without missing a beat, Magnifico appears to view this change of scenery as an upgrade. We don't get much before they have to apply the sleep patches for their jump, but you gotta like the way he corrected Torin when he told his wife that they made a great pair by pointing out that now they're 3. When he gets word they got away, the mule's a little hard to read, but says it doesn't matter because things have a way of working out how they're supposed to. Then he drops the "some things are just preordained" line with a smile on his face before it cuts away, which connects to what Gail said about him in the last episode, when she said that he has a tendency to pull everyone into his orbit in one way or another. He's got other things on his plate, including a call with Empire. Demerzel set this up at Dawn's request, and since he can't reveal that he's been talking with Gail, he can't really justify his sudden interest in the mule beyond saying that he's trying to figure out why their dynasty is supposed to come to an end in 4 months. In the call, he shows the same competence he did in front of the council on Clarion Station in the first episode, only this time it doesn't work. He tries to offer what seems like a reasonable deal for a pirate who just sacked an independent planet, but as he laid it out for Torin, the mule's got bigger things in mind. Paying taxes for access to the Jumpgate trading network won't cut it, especially when we find out later that the screaming Empire heard in the background during the call was from the people he was killing as he was taking the Jumpgate nearest to Calgon by force. Dawn tries to threaten him with war, but the mule asserts that that's something that would favor him because while Dawn was learning to snap his napkins, he was learning to kill. Overall, it goes as you'd expect, and the call doesn't change anything. It's more of a formal introduction, and Dawn is the only one who takes him seriously because of Gail's warnings. The scene at the jump gate that highlights another easy win seems more important. They managed to take it without any alarms going off and plan to let traffic continue as usual. This is a departure from the guy who just threw a party to celebrate his conquest of the Pleasure Planet, so it'll be interesting to see the thinking behind the change of approach, which is probably linked to what I assume is a bomb that we see henchman number 2 arming behind him. The scene ends with him explaining to a wounded soldier who's trying to crawl away that he's not always like this. Someone took his balladeer away from him, and without the soothing music, he's even less calm. The part that stands out is his saying, "Do you ever feel like your life is not your own? Like it's been overtaken by some Holy Spirit?" He ends by saying, "It's sort of a transcendent feeling you have to kill your way out of," as he wipes off his knife, which I suppose gives us some further insight into his motivations. Gale chimes in on this through the voiceover, noting that even though he presents as any other pirate on the surface, underneath the violence and chaos, a plan was taking shape in the shadows that would touch every part of the galaxy. He's not the only one who has a plan taking shape. Brother Day and Song head to the barracks, where they present their plan to the officer who Day had been losing the heirlooms to in the previous episode. His official role is his first clavager, which means keeper of the keys. And they tell him they need his help to get out of the palace because Day's planning to leave for good, and Song is planning on taking her memories with her. It's not really important for the plan, but I noticed the barracks have co-ed showers, which gives the scene a Starship Troopers vibe. Day's problem is that he needs to leave the palace without his brothers or Demerzel finding out. The Clavager's problem is that Empire keeps their families on the grounds, which means he can't leave without them becoming hostages. Brother Day knows that the obscene amount of money he's offering won't be enough, so he brings up his sick daughter and offers to cure her by giving him his Imperial nanites. It seems like an offer he wouldn't be able to refuse, and towards the end of the episode, when they meet again, he agrees to help make it happen. The plan is to disguise them both as Clavagers and sneak them out of Stanl's old keep to the waterways, which give them access to the lower levels, which is reminiscent of Dawn the 14th's escape to the Scar in Season 1. Stanl was the name of Cleon the First's father in the book, and was remembered as the last strong emperor in that version of the story. I suppose the show used the same name as they did with their mother Winniset. Cleon the 24th's plan to go to Mycogen has kept me guessing. As I mentioned in previous videos, Harry Seldon visited there in the prequel book Prelude to Foundation, and I know what he discovered. Because the situations are so different, it's been hard to figure out what the show was trying to accomplish by having Day go there, and I think his following 2 scenes have finally brought that into focus. In the first one, after leaving the barracks, Song and Day notice Demerzel off in the distance, and when he starts acting weird and asking for more spores, Song can't figure out why he seems so paranoid and scared of her. From her point of view, she's his advisor and couldn't be a threat, and when he realizes he can't explain his way around it, he just tells her the truth, that she's a robot. She doesn't believe it at first because the story is that they've all been eradicated, but once she realizes he's telling the truth, you see something change in her. Back at the Love Shack, she barely touches her drugs and starts to lose her resolve about their plan. They go back and forth with her trying to talk him out of it, but Demerzel arrives to tell him that his brothers need him in the throne room before anything is resolved. When he gets there, Dawn pleads his case for the enclosure, which no one thinks is a good idea. While it's toned down some in this episode, Lee Pace pulls out one of his best brother dude moments here by not even knowing who the mule is or what they're talking about. He still says no to the enclosure, even though that's what Demerzel wants him to do, and he knows it's important to Dawn. But that sets up one of the best scenes in the episode when he realizes he missed 25's robing ceremony. In the first look photos for this season that came out even before the trailer, there was a shot of them all sitting there looking bummed out in the throne room with their hands sort of on their chins. That immediately jumped out, and I'd been waiting to see how it would fit into the story. It's right before he brings up the robing, and when Brother Dusk says he stood in for him, Day asks if he did the most important thing, which turns out to be sharing a ceremonial drink. After some pushing from Day, Dusk finally tells Dawn that when Cleon the 7th became Day, he asked the stars for strength, wisdom, and fortitude. Then he takes out his flask and takes 3 hits, one for each of the virtues, saying them out loud after each drink. It makes for a great all-around scene where the history and the current situation are all pushed aside so they can share a moment that the actors all sell through their individual performances to underline that even with the drift and the changes, they're still all the same man, which I think will be important in Mycogen. And I mean, it's always important, but I think this idea that they're all Cleon the First might take on a different importance before the end of this season. The highs from the throne room are short-lived because even though Day finds out the Claviger is on board for the plan on the way out, Demerzel's waiting for him at home rather than Song. After some small talk that involved her bringing up his giraffe, which led to a disagreement about the pronunciation of the word, which was incredibly funny for me for some reason, he finds out that his special lady friend isn't there. When Demerzel interrupted them earlier, you could see Song touch her forearm, which turns out to be a sign used by a religion that had been outlawed for thousands of years because it worshipped robots. It's a pretty big revelation, and it aligns with what Harry discovered on his trip to Mycogen in the book. In the show, Demerzel explains that it's called the Inheritance, and they believe that someday the robots will return to eliminate all cruelty, injustice, and misery. She wasn't aware that it still existed because to follow the religion would be a crime punishable by death. Of course, this statement makes Day think Demerzel killed Song, and when he asks her what she did, she says she denied the sect of something that might have breathed life into their flame. But it turns out that she just erased her memories rather than killing her. And I say that like it's no big deal because she's still alive, but obviously that whole situation is messed up. Demerzel urges him to see it as the mercy it is because she could have killed her. She's compelled to protect her secret, so it would have amounted to Day signing her death warrant by revealing it. She says she didn't do it for him, tries to console him in a way that we haven't seen her interact with 24 to this point, in a motherly way more than anything else. He isn't receptive to her through his rage, and the interaction and the episode ends with him telling her to get out, which she does. Season 3's 4th episode picked up where the premiere left off when it started to do that by having Demerzel explain the 3 laws of robotics and introduce the zeroth law. Of course, this came on the heels of showing how she ended up serving Empire and what I refer to as the Cleonth law in my head when I think about it. We learned about that last season. In episode 4, titled The Stress of Her Regard, Demerzel cops to bringing down the Star Bridge, and her reasoning gets to the heart of why she's the show's most compelling character, and more broadly, why the ideas Asimov explored with the Daniil character still resonate. From the flashbacks to Harry's early life with Yana, we know that his work on psychohistory was on Empire's radar long before Gale Dornick arrived on Trantor. They were following its progression from the beginning, and I tend to think the shadowy male figure we saw stalking him in some of those shots at Helicon University is Demerzel in disguise, but I'm not sure we'll ever get confirmation about that. In her current unburdening session, she explains she reasoned that in the near term, Foundation's success could extend the Empire's reign. Because they feared his predictions, they would have executed him, and that would have given them a false sense of security and allowed them to turn away from the concerns while rushing headlong into catastrophe. She talks about committing this atrocity the way she talks about everything, dispassionately, matter-of-factly. While on some level the instinct isn't any more egregious than things powerful people and nations do on Earth right now in the real world, the Zephyr is rightly appalled and says so. She sort of stands in for the audience and leans into our tendency to anthropomorphize robot characters. How could she? Millions of people died that day and she's just sitting there talking about it like it's nothing. Which goes back to the first line in the episode, the question, do you feel regret? And while I think the answer to the question, does Demerzel experience emotion, is yes, it's more complicated than that because of how those emotions are entangled with her programming. After she makes it plain it wasn't nothing, in fact it was more like everything, Varela starts to get it. She realizes that the choice isn't only about what's right or wrong. She can see that Demerzel understands that her actions would create a lot of wrong in this situation, but she was compelled to follow through anyway. The flavor of regret Demerzel struggles with isn't about the loss of life exclusively. It's just as much about the conflict the paradox creates. This is something that came up in their first conversation when they talked about Harry's decision to give her the Prime Radiant. Her reasoning, that he wanted her to see the fall, which is different from just knowing about it, makes sense. But it left us wondering to what end. What does Harry hope to accomplish by forcing her to live in a paradox? Compelled to try to protect something that will inevitably fail. It's an interesting question. Why he chose to give the Radiant to her was one of the biggest unanswered questions I had coming out of Season 2, and I don't think we can answer it just yet. But the line of thinking leads the Zephyr to propose a thought experiment of her own to Demerzel. Wouldn't the fact that the general she used to be would also help Harry, but then would also destroy her now for the good of the galaxy for continuing to prop up the Empire, indicate that she's an entirely different person? To her, Demerzel's focus on the short term, despite the long-term threat it poses to the Empire, appears to be a sign of seeking a loophole to escape her programming. Which is insightful and might even be correct, but as she lays out the path to salvation, in terms of luminism at least, hinting that perhaps Demerzel has died more than once already, when she went from being a 3 Laws robot to a Zeroth Law robot to a Cleonth Law robot, and as she picks up momentum, she crosses a line that you just can't. With the face reveal and spooky mechanical voice, Demerzel effectively drives the point home. Don't confuse her with a human because she's not. This goes back to some of the things she was saying when she was trying to soothe Brother Dude at the end of the last episode. She's not being dramatic when she says she has few choices in her life. She was created to serve, and her current directive to protect the dynasty and the exponents is inflexible. Later, when they revisit the song situation, she emphasizes today that she must do that, even if it causes them pain, and that's not even saying anything about the conflict it causes for her. I'll return to that in a bit because that's not the big revelation that comes out of that exchange between them. But for this opening sequence, the main takeaway is not to overlook how her programming dictates her actions, because she can't and won't. At least for now, she'll go down with the sinking ship, using every tool at her disposal to make the descent last as long as possible. The Zephyr's point of view presents interesting possibilities for the future, but the present conditions dictate that the dynasty will have to end before any of that's possible. It's a matter of duty, which is the same thing Gale is dealing with when Han returns to Ignis. I thought that Inber naming his ship the Inber was a nice detail, and the suspicions that Han was a double agent working for the Second Foundation are confirmed. As is his relationship with Gale being what he was referring to when he said his loyalties lie elsewhere when Safon made a pass at him on Haven, in case you hadn't watched the trailer for this season, which pretty much gave that away. I like the parallels they're creating here, with Han trying to propose another way of seeing things like Zephyr Varellis, while Gale is so locked in on her responsibility to lead the Second Foundation. I only wish I could find her to be as compelling a character as Demerzel is. To be fair, part of that might be more of the other side being excellent rather than this side being bad, and it has improved season over season. Operator Gale out in the galaxy making things happen, that part's working for me. But at this point, anyone watching has to have put it together that the voiceover they use is Gale talking about things in a historical perspective. It's similar to and based on the excerpts from the Encyclopedia Galactica that Asimov used as a device to play with readers' expectations about the inevitability and success of the Selden plan. Introducing a character who has spent years in cryosleep, so they're essentially just a few years older than they were when we first met them, even though 3 centuries have passed in the story, and having them deliver a historical account of what we're seeing play out is a big hint that they'll be around through the end of the story. Knowing what the show is doing with her, while also knowing how that might connect to later events from reading the books, should make her feel like the main character, but it just hasn't happened yet. I suppose that's the point of this romance, and that makes sense. Han returns to tell her and the first speaker about his run-in with the mule. We get a better idea of how Preem earned that role when he breaks down what he learned about the mule after this shared memory of the club. The main takeaways are that the mule is lonely and wants to be surrounded by others. They're new to him since he hasn't met other mentalics, which might mean they can make him fear them. And the last one is that the music is important. He goes as far as saying it's hypnotic, and that he didn't even need to hear it because he felt it. This makes you think of what the mule was telling the wounded soldier when they were taking over the jump gate. How he isn't always that way, but someone took his ballad dear from him, and the music isn't there to soothe him. We'll have to wait and see if there's more to that, because there are no actual scenes with the mule in this episode. There's a quick shot of Torn, Beta, and Magnifico when Ambassador Quint goes to do some damage control with Brother Dusk, but we don't check in with any of the characters from that part of the story directly. He continues to haunt Gale's visions, but at least for now, they don't believe he discovered their location from reaching into Han's mind. At the end of the day, Gale believes she has to kill him, and none of Pritch's talk of marriage or their relationship is going to get her to change her mind about that. She obviously cares for him, and what they share is not nothing, but it can't be everything either. Theirs isn't the only romance brewing. After we get a quick check-in with Ebling when he goes to tell Inber about meeting Harry, where you get the sense that at least the mayor is expecting Dr. Selden to guide them through the third crisis when he appears from the vault in a couple of days. And Ebling has him call Quint, and in the process of that, he reveals that Empire has the Radiant. When she goes to him about the Mallows, which I've already mentioned, she puts 23 on the spot, and he makes Demerzel produce the Radiant so that he can show it to the ambassador. Their earlier interactions were flirty, but there's an escalation here. Seeing the Prime Radiant is a thrill she likens to holding a holy relic, and I imagine we'll see a lot more of these two together since it seems like he'll be the only brother in the palace by the end of this episode. Seeking out connection in the lead up to the end is human. The countdown for Dusk is on either way, but now Quint and by extension the Foundation are aware of the abrupt end the Radiant is projecting in 4 months. Han's last minute push to get Gale to hold on tighter falls on deaf ears because her mind's on the mule, and her plan involves a trip to Trantor in person to try to press for the enclosure, see what happened when Brother Dawn saw the mule, and try to get him to leave with her. With only a handful of days to go before he'll sit on the middle throne, he's not terribly interested at first. He still doesn't know what Gale's angle is, and leaving is borderline absurd with him being so close to becoming Brother Day. It doesn't take long to realize he was followed to the tea shop, and as they flee, seeing her mentalic abilities is enough to push him over the edge to join her. I think it's worth mentioning that it's an impressive display. She makes it so they can hide from the pursuers in plain sight and makes them forget that they were there in the first place. To seal the deal, when they get on the ship, she tells him that she's from the Second Foundation, which is kind of a surprise, but something I also found ominous in a way that Dawn wouldn't be able to appreciate, considering how this played out. She says his dynasty will end either way, while offering him that escape hatch she knows he'd be responsive to, but leaves out the part that it's in her interest to secure their fall to make sure it happens just as Psychohistory predicted. The current Brother Day is still reeling from learning that his relationship with Song has been erased from her memory, and that she's been sent back to Mycogen. In her absence, he teams up with his ferret Capillus, and goes to the Principian to question the memory of the man who created the clones in his image. The 24th exponent is there to ask about the inheritance. He brings up the gesture she made that put her on Demerzel's radar, and when he mentions that he wants to ask him about the time in the original's life when he looked like him, it sets up the funniest line in the episode when the original deadpans that he might have overstated the resemblance as he changes his appearance to reflect the very undude way he looked at that age. I'm not gonna lie, leading with the unburdening and then following up with this in the same episode had me on the edge of my seat, because as I hinted at in an earlier video when I was talking about them discovering that they're all Cleon the First, I think this whole drug-addled, embrace the void version of Day that has so much disdain for Demerzel's robotic nature is setting things up for him to be the one to free her from her programming. If you think about it, he's the one person across the entire cast of characters who's made peace with the coming end, which could make him as useful to Demerzel as Dawn is to Gale. The opening sequence in the garden doubled down on the reality that her freedom would have to come from a Cleon. And the way they carefully reminded us that even when blasted, he's still remarkably cunning, not only sets up what happens with the Clavager later, but also shows that he could put the plan together without her knowing if he wanted to. I thought I was really onto something, and honestly, I still think I might be. And so I was expecting him to fire up the First, who would then tell him the story about how he inserted the chip, and help him come around to seeing that the right thing to do is set her free, although that would probably happen indirectly, as Cleon the First would want to protect his dynasty rather than bring about its end. That's not how this played out at all, though. Instead, when Day asks about the trip he took to Mycogen, the First tells 24 that's where he got Demerzel's tools in the box with our solar system on it. It turns out that they were a holy relic to Song's people, and they wouldn't give them up peacefully. He says he insisted, and that translates to war crimes to the tune of wiping out 20,000 believers. He had to measure the cleansing because Mycogen is responsible for Trantor's food. You can't just kill them all or the planet will starve. So he tried to wipe out the religion, which was started by the robot sympathizers who fled from the purge Emperor Alberanus led against them, that we've heard about a couple of times in past seasons, but obviously Cleon the First didn't get them all. For reasons I'm not sure I fully understand, he believes 24 will finish the job, and I mean, it wouldn't be the first time we saw Cleon take an unexpected turn towards the most violent option, but Brother Dude is more interested in why the tools were so essential, because what he really cares about is Song. He susses out they were a gift for Demerzel, but Cleon the First doesn't tell him the crucial part about how he changed her. Instead, he vaguely says that it took him a long time to understand them, and even longer before he was ready to give them to her. Because we saw the flashbacks in season 2, we know how that played out. Brother Day asks if he was in love with Demerzel while discrediting the notion at the same time, saying that it's a machine and that the clones are hardly worth loving. Papa Empire shuts it off there. He ends the conversation, but when he tries to deliver the affirmation that the dream lives on in Brother Day, he spits on the floor at his feet before walking out. From there, in another move that seemed designed to cater specifically to what I'm most interested in, he goes straight to Demerzel's room. He finds her doing some maintenance so that her head is detached from her body, which, if you can do that, you probably should. Especially when you know you can rely on the performances from these two actors who've approached this same type of interaction in multiple ways by now. Having the first scene with Laura Byrne in the garden and Lee Pace working opposite Lee Pace in the Principium helps to set this up, as does her trying to explain that she did exercise mercy with Song even though she didn't have to at the end of the last episode. Day is still coming from the "you're a nasty machine who couldn't possibly understand me" perspective, which comes out in everything he says. When the consort comes up, he says he's angry because he loves her, and implies that that's something Demerzel couldn't understand. Of course, we learned from her conversation with Dusk and Rue last season that she does feel love. But her conflict is that she'll never know if it's real or just a product of her programming. Like the first, she never goes there to explain any of this to 24. She mostly just listens to him while he acts like a petulant douche, and says she's glad that he talked to the original because he'd be able to help Day understand how her choices are limited. She brings up the idea that she's compelled to do what's in his best interest even when it causes him pain, which I've already touched on. But as I said, that's not the revelation here. While he mocks her and questions her ability to understand emotions, she pushes back, saying she understands connection. She adds that robots were designed to connect with others of their kind, and robots shared one mind when they wanted to. It was a process called a clasp, where they would share everything. This is something I'm going to just sort of leave there for the time being, because my thoughts about how it might fit into things going forward would be heavily influenced by knowing about the robots in the books. Still, putting all of that to the side, this is incredibly tragic considering that they pointed out for the millionth time in the very last episode that Demerzel is the only known remaining robot in the galaxy. One thing that I think we can be sure of at this point in its run, though, is that they don't introduce something like this and then not do it. A clasp is coming, mark my words. Whether that will affect the story in the short term isn't any clearer than whether or not that some combination of trying to find a loophole while still not violating her directive to protect Empire let some of the zeroth law in with her helping the Foundation to survive. She remains opaque with Day and wasn't 100% forthcoming with Viralis, which is consistent with her characterization and the situation she finds herself in. It makes it hard to speculate on where it's all going, but in the best possible way. After their conversation and after palming one of the tools from her box while they're talking, Brother Dude knows exactly where he's going. The Claviger Maven comes home to find the leader of the Galactic Empire stretched out on his living room floor in his ridiculous coat, introducing Capillus to his daughter. The daughter whom the nanites are supposed to cure, and who is the reason he knows that when he says they need to leave now, he'll get what he wants. While I don't really need more speeder bikes, this is all put together well. One of the things the show's been doing is paying off a lot of things that you pick up on as standing out. For instance, the scene where he was cheating to lose while he gambled with them. It wasn't immediately clear why he was doing that, but the expectation that it would eventually make sense was satisfied after this scene. The buildup of the tension and the dramatic nature of his turning on Mavon all came off perfectly. I was surprised when it happened, but not really because it made sense, and I felt invested. The idea of him being meant to be the sucker, picking up on their tells while watching them play cards, and the retort that he can be the sucker but only when necessary, made for a memorable sequence. He ends up loading the first Claviger up with his nanites to throw Demerzel off his trail, at least for a while. And he acknowledges that a part of him knew that this was always the likely outcome. Inadvertently, Dawn's escape might help buy him some time as well, because now Demerzel has quite a few fires she needs to put out. The fact that I was so right there with this scene and so pumped up to see what happens next really made the voiceover about no one can escape Empire, not even Empire, but he's going to see how far he can go feel unnecessary. And I kind of wish they hadn't included that. I'll be curious to see how that landed for other people, as it felt like one of those moments that could have been transcendent for the series, but instead it chose to rehash some things you already knew from watching the previous scene. That could just be me, and I don't want to take anything away from it because I think it's a great episode regardless. One of my favorites from this season that the rest paved the way for naturally, which is saying something in a complicated narrative with a lot of different balls in the air, which is keeping me excited to see where they go from here. The fantastic looking wide shot of him riding off into Trantor's underworld to see how the other half lives cuts to a shot of Demerzel alone, looking at a part of the mural that I don't think we've seen before. She'll hear about Day's nanites from the Shadow Master and then go to her room where she learns that he made off with one of her tools. We see Dawn and Day's paths almost cross as they run away, and it all adds up to an exciting ending. The episode opens with Day arriving at Mycogen, and this whole sequence struck me the same way the club scene in the third episode did. It feels like a lived-in world. Does the concept of a single-lane road on the side of a building kind of thing for him to ride his floating bike down vertically seem like something they added because it would look cool more than it makes sense? Probably, but that doesn't change the fact that this new location does look cool. We come in from above, and it just looks like a real place. And maybe we've been somewhat spoiled at this point. Like there was one of these shots where we do a flyby on Calgon earlier in the season that looked fantastic, and I never got around to mentioning that in the recap. Saying the show looks good may seem redundant, but given the news that the production company will likely be pulling on the purse strings from here on out coming up again this week, we should probably enjoy it while we can. The show planted the seed that Mycogen is a bit of a Wild West scenario where you just wouldn't go if you didn't have a good reason to. And it plays out like that. The locals don't come off as welcoming, but I do think Day has what he thinks is a good reason to be there. I think he's looking for song, the muse Demerzel relieved him of. I've seen comments and posts suggesting there might be more to the story, but I buy the idea that this is the one central character who has made peace with the coming end, and he wants to lean into bliss in the time that's left. The first episode was titled A Song for the End of Everything, after all. There's also the fact that she worships robots, and he has the stolen tool that could give him an in with a group of fanatics who might be privy to some information that is otherwise lost for the population at large. Having him reverse his disdain for Demerzel and to set her free makes more sense than him trying to be the hero who saves the galaxy or even just the dynasty. That's not who the clones are. We like watching them, but they're dastardly rather than heroic. They continually surprise us with their depravity instead of charity. Plus, regardless of the distance this day has created between them, the clones do all form a genuine connection to Demerzel that goes back to the original's love for her. She is the closest thing to a mother they have. As mentioned, the locals don't take kindly to strangers. And it's notable that they were under the presumption that this was at least one of Empire's clavigers, or maybe even were expecting Day himself, and didn't hesitate to start unloading on him. Yeah, they were non-lethal weapons, but the poor dupe, who was just trying to make some extra cash as a decoy, did look kinda beat up when they were done with him. They accuse him of trespassing on the lands controlled by Sunmaster 18. Cleon I explained why that might be a justification for getting aggressive with Imperials in the last episode. He said they produce Trantor's food, kind of implying they produce all of it, saying that if he killed too many of them, the planet would starve, which would be a change from the books. In those, Trantor relied on a network of breadbasket planets. And Mycogen produced higher quality foods using yeast, algae, bacteria, and multicellular fungi, among other things. They called it microfoods, and it was delicious and expensive. Brother Day brought this up when he was telling Brother Dusk about Song. The first time I watched this, I was somewhat confused because I'd been thinking the main issue for his escape would be Demerzel. But even though it would have been hundreds of years ago, this hints that the Mycogenians haven't forgotten what the First did to the followers of the Inheritance. They haven't gotten over it. When they get his helmet off, they realize the decoy isn't who they thought he was. And Demerzel realizes the same thing when they arrive at the spillway and fish Maven out of the water. She's not surprised, but I was kind of surprised at her response when the Shadow Master offered to go find him. Not that she knew where he was going, but the part when she said, "We will not see him again, and he will not trouble us." She does get the alert that Dawn is arriving at Clarion Station at the same time, but other than saying her Cleons are scattered, she didn't seem concerned about Day at all. I suppose if you had to prioritize, Dawn is the next in line, and his ascension to the middle throne is right around the corner. He's proven himself to be capable, and causing problems with the Galactic Council could be more destabilizing in the short term. I don't think I'll be alone in thinking the Dawn and Gale team-up part of this episode is what works best. It's pretty good TV all the way around, and it definitely grabbed me and had me locked in the first time I watched. When I went back to take notes, there were a couple of things that stood out to make me like it even more. The first of those was him asking her about her powers, starting to wonder if she used them on him. She answers that she tried not to, but then she makes this concession that it's hard to tell sometimes, which makes her seem honest and someone that he could really trust, which takes on a whole new meaning once we see how things play out. It's one of those things where you're watching and thinking, of course, you can trust the person with the crazy powers of manipulation. It's Gale. She's one of the good guys. Dawn is feeling her out, but we know more about the situation. And in this case, that makes us more set up for the big surprise towards the end. The other thing was how Dawn used his powers, which are entirely disconnected from mentalic abilities, but just as effective for manipulating Terrask and the situation overall. That is the whole plan. Gale convinced Dawn that they needed the enclosure, and they identified this representative of the sector that's closest to Calgon as their mark. The plan is to create evidence that makes him look complicit with the mule's takeover, and then threaten to expose him if he doesn't vote the right way. From Dawn's reception when he enters the chamber, you can be sure that doing something like this was their only option. He wasn't going to be able to walk in there and deliver a moving speech and get the opposition to support the idea. Enclosures have been outlawed since Cleon the 17th lost his fleet above Terminus at the end of last season. Because the dynasty is weak, the council is a lot more vocal in its opposition, so you can see how the previous enclosure tipped the balance of power. Losing the spacers, so that Empire now has to rely on jump gates, turns out to be even more crucial and a fundamental part of the mule's plan, which Gale helps Dawn walk right into. You'd think it would be hard to fail more spectacularly than 17 did, but at least for as long as he was alive, he thought he destroyed the Foundation. 25 has nothing here, which makes the betrayal all the more brutal. She did that. Last episode I gave Gale a bit of a hard time, but she's making some interesting moves here. It all worked well because we had some idea she was using Dawn, but her plan here involves her being okay with not just Empire losing its fleet and that loss of life, but the mule destroying a whole planet full of innocent people. I'm not saying she knew it would be as bad as it was, but I am saying she lied trying to get Dawn to call for an enclosure she wanted to fail. There isn't a way that happens without a lot of people getting hurt. I wasn't expecting her to be so cold-blooded for the greater good or not. Nobody said there wouldn't be tough decisions. You gotta like a covert mission, especially when you see the Second Foundation has people there so close to the levers of power. Watching Dawn embrace the clone's ruthless side. Terrace makes a good argument against helping him. It would put his wife and 2 young children in harm's way, only to have to cave to the throne in the end. Empire just shooting his girlfriend and telling him to take care of it. Seeing the Galactic Council push back, Dawn coming out on top with Terrace's help, the countdown until they enclose the planet, and then the mule being one step ahead. It all makes for an exciting buildup. I wasn't sure exactly what he was referring to when he said a cobalt spike, as far as his method of destruction here. We saw him plant the device on the jump gate when they took it. He says that all that harnessed energy is building and building until it bursts. When looking into this, the most promising lead I found was that cobalt-60 was a radioactive isotope that's a byproduct of nuclear fusion. And to power something like a jump gate, you'd need a lot of energy. Without knowing the specifics about how the gates work in Foundation, I describe what we see on screen as the mule's device redirecting energy from the gates into the system's star, causing a reaction that slingshotted enough of something to destroy the planet. The gates vaporized in the process, and we see Terrace's family get the same treatment on the surface as the pleasure planet ceases to be. It's a sci-fi thing and it looks pretty sick, and I'm okay with that. The planet Haven is another one of those. It's the one we met Pritchard on in the premiere that's tidally locked so that one side always faces its sun. When that was introduced, I wasn't sure that it would be that habitable. I mean, beyond the one side being unbearably hot and the other freezing. But between then and now, I read a book that takes place primarily on a tidally locked moon. It wasn't a place you'd want to live or could live. You can live on Haven though, at least a narrow strip of its surface, but we learn in this episode that Torin didn't want to. After their narrow escape from Calgon, they find out that while the mule's henchmen couldn't stop them from jumping, their attack did damage their jump drive. Going back to New Terminus is no longer an option, so he has to return to Haven, something Gale tells us in the voiceover he never wanted to do after turning his back on the traitors and his uncle Randu. She adds that now that they're fully wrapped up in the conflict, he knows his only way out is to convince the traitors that Magnifico is more than the mule's clown, that he and his music are the key to solving the third crisis. And that last part felt like she was getting ahead of herself based on what we saw when they first met, but Beta explains the thinking behind it later when she's talking to Randu alone. We also see Pritchard's homecoming, or his return to New Terminus anyway, and Ember's welcome is more in line with what Day was facing in Mycogen. Unsurprisingly, the mayor isn't happy about having his ship stolen, or the idea of hand-working with the Mallows, who are connected to the traitors, who are actively trying to secede from the Foundation. He's not receptive to Pritchard's claims that the mule is more important than any of that, or the idea of getting information from his clown. He's not interested in learning how to juggle, and he has Han locked up, telling his security to make sure he's miserable. That leads to a scene where he's subjected to a strip search conducted by the people who used to work for him. Safan, the woman who came on to him after they were chasing down evidence that Empire was supplying weapons to the traitors on Haven, warns him to not try to escape because he won't make it. On her way out, she grabs the pouch he wears around his neck which now that we know he's in a relationship with Gale, I can point out that I think this is the pouch she used to keep her cheekstones in when she removed them before leaving Synax. He's tucked away for now. I'm guessing that if push came to shove, he could use his mentalic abilities to change that, but he'd also blow his cover in the process. As it stands, the second Foundation has a man on the inside on New Terminus. And speaking of Randu, who was the person they were chasing on Haven, the time at his place gives us a fair amount of backstory on the traitors and Beta and Tauren, plus quite a few artifacts from the time of Hober Mallow, including castling bracelets and the Eye of Corel from his introduction last season. Hober was his grandfather, and I guess you have to say allegedly after that. I've been wondering if we were supposed to assume Tauren was a direct descendant of Brother Constant and Hober's union. Remember that they did consummate their relationship. The part that was making me question it was what Randu brings up here. Even though Hober talked a big game, I kinda believed him when he said he slept around. It seemed likely that he might have had some other children, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'd been leaning towards no, since there hasn't been any mention of Constant, and this conversation didn't change my mind in any way. Randu goes into the resentment the traitors have for the Foundation proper. His description is a little more colorful, but it's in line with what Harry said to Ebling inside the vault. A minority of merchant princes pitted against a conservative majority. Maybe you could say he has a libertarian streak, but his decision not to have his arm replaced after he lost it in an accident makes him seem stubborn if nothing else. There are some festering bad feelings between him and Tauren, who ended up living with his uncle after his parents died in a shuttle accident when he was 10. Randu lost his son and his arm in the same accident. The trip adds another layer to Tauren and Beta. They weren't born with silver spoons in their mouths, and she describes herself as a climber. Coming from one of the Foundation's jump past planets, which basically sound like small towns in the middle of nowhere, she latched on to Tauren looking for a way out, but they ended up developing a true partnership. You see her abilities on display here, and I think everyone comes out of it looking more interesting. She brings up Magnifico's music, and her theory that it's what helped the mule take over Calgon so easily. That would certainly jive with what the mule was saying at the jump gate about not always being that brutal, and the music soothing him. And you do notice that Magnifico is always playing. So there's more going on with the influencers. They're brighter and shrewder than you might have guessed. When Randu says she has something the Foundation can use in Magnifico, she says it's even better than that. She has something they don't know they need. In the end, Randu is drawn to their traitor spirit. He also sees an angle where delivering Magnifico might earn him a seat at the table and might open up an opportunity for his faction to break away. Once the mule rains on Brother Dawn's parade, Clarion Station goes into lockdown. And that means Gale needs to get Empire out so that they can't audit his memory and find out about her. Her agents coordinate his escape while she uses her abilities to impersonate him to draw all his guards in and then put them to sleep. It's the second episode in a row that she uses her powers to get him out of an impossible situation, and it makes you wonder what her limitations are at this point. Does she have any, or is the mule the only threat she has left? They send Dawn to a maintenance area to put on a suit so he can pop an airlock and she can pick him up with her ship. While he's putting it on, we see Brother Dusk listening to the message he recorded earlier to apologize for having to miss his ascension. We don't see much of his reaction, but since it's the Novacula scientist who tells him about the message, it really makes you think about how Dusk, the one with the black hole bomb, is the only clone left in the Imperial Palace right now. The show doesn't linger on it because at the same time it hits Dawn that Gale probably knew what the mule was up to and served him and his armada up on a platter. When he says he won't come to her ship if he can't trust her, she admits that she needed the enclosure to fail because she needs Empire to shrink. That's the bottom line. Vault Harry gave Demerzel the Radiant, which helped the Empire hold on better than Psychohistory initially projected, and the second Foundation exists to ensure things stay on track. Their job is to correct any deviations from the plan. So she tells him straight up that she needed Empire to shrink, and to defeat the mule, Foundation has to be the most significant power in the galaxy. Of course, Dawn doesn't want to believe the Cleonic Age has to come to an end for that to happen, but she tells him how the Galactic Council will react now that he's lost his fleet. They'll take control of the Imperium. That will effectively end the Cleon's rule, and then they'll try to make a deal with the mule in an attempt to appease him. That doesn't seem likely. His stated purpose is to take everything, and Gale believes that when he takes Trantor, the Foundation can trap him there, starve him out, and kill him that way. It's not the story he wanted to hear, so he pulls out the earpiece she gave him and cuts off communications. But before we can figure out what he was planning to do there, Tara shows up to try to kill him, which I think is fair. Dawn isn't the only one who suffered a brutal betrayal on Clarion Station today. He's the better shooter of the two, though, and after Terrace says his piece, he signs his own death warrant by closing his eyes before shooting the airlock door that Dawn was in the middle of opening, and spaces himself in pretty dramatic fashion. We hear the rest of Dawn's message to Dusk about being one of the Cleons that run, to crank things up a little more. Cassian Bilton delivers his best performance to date here, and then 25 is sucked out of the airlock. We don't see him expire, and he's wearing a suit, so I doubt this is the last we'll see of him. As tense as that was, it's not the end of the episode, and that starts with a bit of a fake out when Gale gets an alert that someone has entered the airlock on her ship. It's not Dawn, although it would have been funny if it were, since the cut made it seem like she got the alarm a few seconds after he went through the airlock. A little while ago, I questioned whether the mule might be the only threat left for Gale, but that was before Demerzel showed up. I guess it just slipped my mind. Her mentalic abilities may not be as effective on a non-human. Demerzel drops oh hey Gale, it's been like 300 years, you're looking great, and the episode ends there. After donning a pair of what I guess you'd call wraparound glasses and a knit bucket hat, the 24th tries to blend in on the streets of Mycogen. While he's taking a look around, he hears about his fleet being destroyed above Calgon, and remarks to a street vendor that it's worse than she knows. She has an interesting look to her, perhaps not as conventionally attractive as Song, and I couldn't tell if she was tattooed or had some kind of mycogen skin condition that could be part of the world building. She offers him a sweet from the micro farms, explaining that they all taste different, which can be a problem since sometimes you get one that tastes better than anything, and then you can't have it again. He picks up a box after sampling it, and we see the spark that this particular day has for a specific courtesan from Gossamer Court return, kind of erasing the end of everything vibe he took on after hearing about the fleet. What she says about the candy ends up more fitting for his situation than he knows, because when he makes it to Song's apartment, things don't go as planned. We knew that she had her memory wiped, so there's a fun bit where, knowing that he has her memories with him, he tries to feel out if there are any latent feelings that spill over into this person he had a connection with, who is shocked to see him show up at her front door. His super duper disguise doesn't stop her from realizing that he's Empire, but of their time together, she only remembers him picking her and then the trip home. As you'd imagine, she isn't sure what to make of it as he wanders around digging on her apartment, pointing out things like having a window is good, and I feel like they missed an opportunity here to have him point out a rug. I know they probably couldn't have him say that it really ties the room together, but the inference would have been enough for me. She wonders if this is part of the arrangement, that he follows up with all the lovers he takes after they have their memories wiped. He asks if she wondered why he extended her stay, and she figures the sex must have just been that good, and when it's obvious the feelings aren't bleeding through, he tells her he brought her memories. Because she asked him to, and looked at him like someone who might do her a kindness, so he threw out all the rules and he's here. This puts her in a spot where she has to walk a fine line because of who he is, which both performances make a lot of fun to watch, but when he tries to insist that she just put on the device because it'll make her see they were in love, she has to push back. For her, it was a business arrangement, saying she's sure he's wrong about her feelings, and that sets him off. Seeing that he overstepped, he tries to dial it back and shift the focus to the miracle she experienced as a follower of the inheritance, telling her that she met a robot. He thinks that would be enough, and he continues his pleas, but they're mostly falling on deaf ears because she's already called her life mate, who shows up with one of those stun gun things he avoided by sending the decoy in the last episode, and he finds out that their time together wasn't exactly what he thought it was. Her partner, Oceanglass, brings up the first trying to wipe their people out, so they haven't forgotten, but we'll have to wait until the next episode to see what they do with him. He has Demerzel's tool, but other than that, it feels like he's on his own in a fairly hostile situation. Gale also got a big surprise when Demerzel showed up on the beggars at the end of the last episode, and we pick up with that right where it left off. If she wasn't already hostile from having to chase Dawn down only to find out his nanites stopped transmitting his vitals shortly before she got there, Gale's implying she's a bad parent pushes her over the edge. She shows real emotion here and makes it plain that she will be finding out why 25 died for Gale or because of her. This shot of her choking Gale against the wall was in the trailer, and it's been something I've been waiting to see since that came out. Things escalated until Gale took a couple of shots at her. Demerzel dodges the first, and then her face gets grazed by the second. That only slows her down a little, and then the choking happens. Demerzel is surprised that Harry never told her that she was a robot, and we see her pause for a second until her skin starts to heal itself, and then she tells her she'll be getting her answers, including why she shouldn't end her life this instant, and it's badass. There are two big surprises here. The first is what I hinted at in the beginning. She helped Harry create Psychohistory by giving him access to her memories to complete his data set. She says he convinced her that the formation of the Foundation and the preservation of Empire were not mutually exclusive goals, at least not in the short term, which I suppose makes her telling Varellis the same thing more understandable, or at least that's their intention. Her contribution to Psychohistory is something Asimov added to the prequels after the fact, and one of the spoilers I left out of my Demerzel video, so book readers won't be too surprised by that. The second thing jumped out at me more. That was her saying that Harry knew she was a robot from the beginning, and this is the critical part, that she doesn't know how. Gale sees a potential way out in Demerzel working with Harry. As she tries to explain that she is his plan, Demerzel puts it together that the second Foundation has been what was causing the shadows in the math she'd been noticing in the Prime Radiant. Gale explains how the second Foundation's different, and when she brings up their mentalic abilities, Demerzel asks about the mule. That leads to more Demerzel getting caught up on the situation, and most importantly, coming to understand that Gale and the mule are outliers that screw up the math. Gale also tells her that she can project her consciousness forward in time, and when Demerzel says that isn't possible, she explains she experiences time like the spacers, not literally, but as a shape. This connects back to her staying awake during her first jump on the way to Trantor, and she describes seeing her life as a line and then as a plane that she wrapped around herself like a blanket, realizing it was a shape she could manipulate. Demerzel wants to see her vision of the mule and thinks there's a way it can be done. In one of her previous capacities, she would interrogate human subjects, which made me think of the detective days and the cerebro analysis, but she tells Gale she can access her brain directly through filaments. When they're about to get started and Gale mentions she needs to feel like she's drowning, Demerzel deadpans that won't be a problem, and that is the best line of the episode. It works, and she's able to experience the vision firsthand, recognizing that it happens on Trantor in front of the Imperial Library. This is a big revelation that Gale doesn't think makes sense. When Demerzel asks if she's tried to go further into the period where everything looks like it ends, she says she tried, but there's nothing there. They go back in so Demerzel can see it for herself, and it's mostly black and dreamy. There's something that looks like an eclipse, but when Demerzel tries to touch the light, it causes her to suffer a system failure, which leads to a hard reboot that creates a localized electromagnetic pulse and shuts everything down. Gale's heart also stopped beating, so Demerzel has to act fast and shock it to bring her back, and it all wasn't for nothing as she initially thinks. Demerzel Demerzel picked up on a sound that humans can't hear, an infrasonic signature from the gravitational waves emanating from a black hole. And 4 months from now, they expect Gale will be orbiting the ergosphere of one of those. I would point out that this isn't the first time we heard that term this season, but I think black hole is enough to make this feel connected to the Novacula one way or another for everyone. While the visions are concerning, Demerzel can't really be sure that they're real. They could just as easily be hallucinations. In either way, she would need to be sure that helping Gale won't harm the dynasty. So she will let her live, but that's it for now. To rewind a bit, the opening shot of the episode is the mule waking up from a nightmare. This scene appears to be a partial redo of Season 2's closing shot to replace the actor and establish where it fits in the timeline. Otherwise, it doesn't provide any new information other than confirming that he found out who Gale was when he looked into Pritchard's mind. He knows she's in their time and says he has to destroy her, even if he has to burn everything to do it. We'll find out later that he's on his way to New Terminus, as are the Mallows and Magnifico. The Balladeer is worried that the Foundation might take him away from Beta, who reassures him he has nothing to worry about, saying that they're good at making people love them. It looks like they're in for another rough welcome until they drop Captain Han's name, which seems to open the door, but it turns out to be the door to his cell, and they don't go in as visitors. The plan is to lock them all up together. There's still bad blood between Randu and Pritch over what happened on Haven, and getting Torin and Beta involved on Calgon. They get into it, and after that gets broken up, you realize that no one in the room is happy to see each other. There's enough tension to go around, but it's all leading to the reveal of their secret weapon, Maggie's playing, which Beta and Randu discussed in the last episode. When he finds out that the busy sonar is on New Terminus, Han asks him if he'd work against the mule, and he isn't against it. Inber comes to get Magnifico, and the clown gets him to bring everyone else along except for Pritchard, who remains isolated in the cell. The clock is ticking because, as we see from a great shot of Ebling waiting outside the vault, the eclipse is imminent, which means Harry's going to make his first appearance since the last crisis. In the mayor's office, Randu airs the traitors' grievances. Inber isn't receptive, and he points out that Magnifico is valuable, but then throws out the idea of returning him to the mule. They continue to go back and forth, and then Torin warns that the mule is coming for the Foundation, whether it can come to terms with the traitors or not, and that when Harry appears, he might end up talking about the choices they make in this moment, which is a reminder that they think Psychohistory will have predicted all of this ahead of time. Then Beta suggests they just listen to Magnifico play, and the mayor agrees to bring all his top people in to do that. They listen and they experience the music's power, and as it worked its way into their hearts, the eclipse started. Everyone in the room started to realize how the mule used it to take over Calgon, and that he might be vulnerable without it. They're all visibly moved, and by the time he was done playing, the Traitors Alliance and Foundation proper were ready to work together to defeat their common enemy. They feel ready to solve the crisis, but they're still looking towards Harry's guidance, and Beta says she'd like to meet this Selden fellow everyone's always banging on about, so they head to the vault. On his way, Inber stops to see Han trying to figure out where he went during all the missing time after he stole his ship. He doesn't know for sure about Ignis, but it reinforces his suspicions that Pritchard is working for someone else. He says he only works for the Selden plan, which isn't technically a lie. After Inber leaves him there, everyone else converges on the vault for a recreation of one of the best reveals in the original Foundation trilogy. In that, Harry isn't this digital consciousness that can interact with people. He died of old age in the book, so one of the last things he did after setting his plan into motion was to record a series of holographic messages laying out the future crises. They were placed in what was called the Time Vault in the books, which was nothing like the show's version, and set to trigger at specific times based on his calculations. Essentially, the crisis would happen, and then the vault would open up and they would watch the recording he made all that time ago describing what the crisis was and how they solved it. It wasn't just a cool trick, but a way to reaffirm belief in a plan that required the followers not to know what it predicted for it to work. The side effect of that was that people started to believe it, that the plan would account for everything. At this point in its development, the Foundation had become complacent as it gathered power. The show has shown the same thing throughout this season, with Ebling telling Harry about it directly when they met earlier in the season. It's also condensed the order of the Seldon crises so that the mule is the third crisis, compared to the fifth in the books. In those, the complacency and diminishing returns from the hollow messages from Harry telling them, "Good job, you figured out the crisis yourselves as I predicted," led to them not even showing up at the vault for the scheduled appearances. In both cases, you can see how their belief in psychohistory, combined with their required ignorance about what was coming, sets them up to be entirely caught off guard when the mule appears. In the books, Ebling spends his time figuring out when the simulacrum of Harry will appear. And in the show, he figures out how to null the null field to talk to him. Everything else that's going on is pretty similar. And in the books, everyone, including the reader, is shocked when the recording of Harry has no idea that the mule is the crisis. We see this play out in the show, where digital Dr. Seldon's ability to interact not only creates a funny moment when he disses Mayor Inber, but also adds gravity to his having no idea who the mule is. The result is pretty much the same, only here the mule has timed his invasion of New Terminus to coincide with Harry's appearance. He makes a virtual appearance of his own, reframing the question from who is the mule to where is the mule, and the answer is that he's on their doorstep. Again, we see the Foundation ships firing on each other, doing his work for him, and he puts Dr. Seldon on the spot, asking if this was part of his plan. Ebling and everyone else in the vault look to Harry to help them, and he just stands there looking befuddled before he disappears. To really put an exclamation point at the end of the sentence, he activates the null field so everyone has to flee. With all the main characters making it out alive, with the whole planet becoming a battlefield around them. Inber has another chance to come off as a real weasel when he doesn't let Ebling into his ground car after Magnifico trips and falls. And we see Beta collapse before she can clear the null field, and Torin has to carry her when she doesn't regain consciousness. Now it's her who has the dizzies, I guess. On the Beggar, as Demerzel's getting ready to leave, she starts noticing a high volume of transmissions. She and Gale realize New Terminus will likely fall, and if it does, the mule will gain access to their Whisper fleet and could be on Trantor's doorstep before they know it. It looks like there's been a complete shift in the balance of power. Gale's idea of using Foundation's resources to box the mule in after he took Trantor is entirely out of the question. Demerzel is going home, where she has a brother Dusk teetering on the brink of early onset senility, sitting on a secret planet killing weapon. At the same time, Dawn is dead or MIA, and Day is basically in the custody of robot worshipping fanatics in the bowels of the capital's lower levels. The closing shot is of the vault going dark and hovering there dormant like it had for the past century and a half, with Harry presumably inside, knowing that the mule being a true outlier means the plan is off the rails. I didn't spend a lot of time on it in my episode 6 video because Harry's being surprised is the heart of that scene, but the original prediction was essentially that through the conflict between the traitors and the Foundation's ruling class, the latter would be deposed. A stronger coalition government would take its place, which the math showed was a necessary step in the process of creating the new and improved Second Galactic Empire. The first part of that still plays out later in the episode, when we see its symbolic end in a gaudy executive bathroom on Foundation Station, which is tied to the flashback the episode opens with. In that, we visit the breadbasket planet Rossum, where we meet a young mule. The scene doesn't open on him. It opens on a woman who will learn is his mother as she's holding a baby. A tranquil sleeping baby who she seems to adore. A few things are going on here. Scratching out an existence on the planet growing Blydock is difficult, but the older boy, who as I mentioned is a young mule, seems happy overall. Part of the reason his family is struggling is due to the restrictions and quotas imposed on them by the Foundation. Families working and living on the planet are subjected to a one-child policy, a rule that his family is breaking, and the extra mouth to feed is an additional stress on top of trying to keep their secret. It paints the Foundation as harsh and impersonal, especially after they discover the hidden baby. The system in place doesn't allow for any flexibility, and they're given 30 days to comply with the policy, which means they have to get rid of one of the kids. To this point, his parents are depicted as ordinary people trying to make ends meet who have landed themselves in an impossible situation. As the story progresses, it starts to feel like there might be more going on. Of course, they're protective of their defenseless baby like any parents would be. And I might be reading too much into it, but it all seems a little off when you go back to watch after you know how things play out. The way they keep referring to it as the baby, and how they shoot down every idea the mule throws out that would allow them both to live, saying things like they'll never give him back. Plus, I'm not saying that drowning a baby is ever the right choice, or something that I could ever fathom doing, but their choice is presented as a binary. They can't keep them both, and they're pretty quick to decide to kill the boy they've raised, who is definitely old enough to understand the choice they're making. What I'm saying is that they don't choose the path of least resistance. Either way, it doesn't go as planned. After his father tries to drown him, the mule discovers that he has the power to stop him, and does that in pretty convincing fashion. He screams, which puts his father down, and then he uses his abilities to make his parents stay under the water until they drown, saying, "You love me more than anything," which is echoed when he makes his landing on New Terminus and tells his new subjects that they'll learn to love him, as he did to the security forces on Calgan back in episode 2. In that, he talked about this idea of conversion, and we see that as Inber bends the knee and surrenders the capital to him, with the warden immediately backing him up. Before that, through Pritch and Seth's conversation, we found out that some of the commanders were giving orders to fire on their own ships, which is also a throwback to the Pleasure Planet. Later, Ambassador Quint describes it as the capital ships refusing to fight until their subordinates started breaking ranks, and then the commanders began firing on their own people. We also learned that things were chaotic on the surface, as Torin carried a still unconscious Beta through some hectic fighting, which again was all Foundation on Foundation violence. The Black Tongue lands and the mule declares himself first citizen. He's got little Breadroll with him and has her perform a blooding ceremony for the mayor. It's funny because on the first watch, it's plain that the warden has fallen under his influence, but you wonder if Inber might just be trying to cut a deal to save his hide. That question will be answered in the bathroom scene I mentioned earlier, and the leverage he offers up in the arrangement is his Minister of Information, Han Pritcher. This revelation leads to the mule repeating his line, "Some things are preordained." This actually adds some gravity to one of the less engaging story threads to a certain extent, in that it would be bad if the mule got a hold of Han. And we've seen Gale's vision where the mule is on Trantor, choking her, trying to learn the location of the Second Foundation. To ask about it, he must first be aware of its existence, and beyond its members, which includes Pritch, Demerzel and Dawn are the only other characters that know about it. So this could be leading to some torture of the double agent, or a sign that Brother Dawn is indeed still out there somewhere. I mentioned Dusk and Ambassador Quint on Trantor. They spend the episode filling in the details about what's happening and building up to an age-appropriate love affair, which Dusk sets up by saying she turned his gallows walk into a pleasant stroll. He's got 3 days to live, so why not? There's a moment before they get together where his commanders and advisors are briefing him since he's the only person of authority in the palace. In that, you see him sort of staring past them. Initially, I thought he wasn't engaged because he was thinking it's not his problem to solve, or because he had the black hole bomb. Then you find out he's actually sitting there hallucinating, thinking he's watching a camel walking through the halls. It's evidence that the new forced retirement age probably makes sense, but he does pull himself together enough to issue some orders before he goes looking to hook up with Quint. This feels like a typical TV show tactic used before killing off a character. They give them some humanizing moments to make you care and feel a sense of loss once they're gone. We know that 23 has an expiration date, and I believe Demerzel when she said she was the clock for every Cleon's life, and the time she kept was exact. So the whole dalliance with the ambassador, and maybe that's even underselling what was going on between them, including his coming around on Dave's ferret, who he gleefully fed in front of his new special lady friend after being noticeably annoyed to see it pop up at the dinner table. All of that was leading to this post-coital glow scene where he looks happy, and you're expecting him to be somewhat content despite the circumstances. Instead, he lures Capillus in with some food, only to remind us of how cruel the clones can be. Did I mention he has a black hole bomb? I'm sure I did. That and the camels and genetic drift make you wonder if the point here is that his cruelty extends beyond what we've been shown his brothers have been capable of over the centuries. This hints at an obvious opening for him to shock his new lover with it by using the Navacula to destroy New Terminus where the mule currently is. But considering 17 did that last season, and Harry just used the ball to whisk everyone away to safety, that doesn't seem likely. His doing something awful does feel likely. We'll just have to see what it is. I'm trying to clear the table so I can get to the part I found most interesting. And a couple of the new characters are moving around like pieces on a chessboard. Things happen fast, so after their big confrontation, we don't check in with Demerzel or Gale at all in this episode. On the second Foundation front, Pritch bites himself to create an emergency to lure his guard into a cell. Then he uses his mentalic abilities to use his body as a decoy, and eventually escapes. The mule learns about this when he tries to take a shot at him, which doesn't work because the weapons appear to have a failsafe so that only the person they're issued to can shoot them. Perhaps that's something he should have known as their top spy. He makes it back to the ship, but heads to the surface rather than jumping to safety. The other piece we see in motion is Torin, who's been moving his way through the battle, trying to get Beta to safety. He makes it back to their ship and gets her into the medbay, but Randu comes in right after him. This gives them a chance to reconcile, which is something Torin wanted, but there's an added layer here. His uncle has switched sides and serves as a way for us to see what happens to someone when they come under the mule's influence. To hear him describe it, it's kinda great. It doesn't change who you are at all, and it hooks you into a love that's like nothing he's ever experienced before. It allows him to tell Torin all the things he's always wanted to hear, and he assures his nephew, whom he is really proud of, that the mule has no problem with them. He's just going after the powers that be, which is ultimately in line with what the traitors were after in the first place. And as they like to do, they're probably gonna get rich as a bonus. So he sees taking the Whisper ship and handing it over for favor and a reward as a win-win situation. Given the limited time the show had to invest in these characters, the scene mostly lands as intended. The idea of hearing things like, "I want you safe and you don't have anything to prove," from someone he's always looked up to in a situation where they lose their meaning makes Torin's journey more interesting going forward. He doesn't get on board with his uncle's thinking, and then things get more complicated when another armed group arrives to secure the ship. This also muddies the water of how Magnifico's playing influenced the events. You have that ridiculous statement Inber made in episode 6, where he said he'd essentially invite everyone important into a room so they can all listen to the music that could potentially control their minds at the same time. That appears to be connected to the commanders on the capital ships refusing to fight and then instigating the friendly fire situation. But then you also have these two. Torin and Randu were both there, and they're coming down on opposite sides. Or they were coming down on opposite sides. The new group arrives and takes Beta, so we don't know where she'll end up. She's still unconscious, by the way, and her reaction to the null field appears worse than everyone else's. After they remove her from the medbay, Torin makes a break for an escape pod. Randu makes a final plea that doesn't convince him to stay. The uncle takes a shot to the head that ends him, and Torin is ejected, screaming on his way somewhere that's away from there. Pritchard's escape leaves the mule disappointed in the mayor. That leads to his ending in the bathroom. And when the mule goes to Seth for answers about why Han would head to the planet, she says he's probably already halfway to starting an insurrection. Inber's final moments are another example of the mule's powers. You can see that he's able to override his body's survival instinct. There's some fighting and a visible internal conflict, but he does what he was told willingly, even happily. The mule says it's a bad way to go drowning, and that loops the story back to the conclusion of his flashback. After he uses his newfound powers to take care of his parents, he collects the baby and leaves him on the neighbor's doorstep. Since the only other character that was introduced with the mule was Magnifico, it's impossible not to think the baby might be him. There aren't any other candidates. I should mention that Maggie doesn't appear in episode 7. Torin mentions they lost him as they were getting away, but we never see where he ended up or what he was doing during the attack. If I had to guess, I'd say the baby is him. The other option is that the baby isn't important, but since he leaves him behind, we're going to need another flashback to see what happened there. As this one cuts back to the present day timeline, we see that the mule is telling his story outside the vault so that Harry can hear it. He says he escaped his home planet by joining the pirates, who we'd heard were active in the area and were shaking down the local farmers, further complicating things for them. His story's grand finale is that he says that as bad as they were, they never took as much as the Foundation did. It's a tragic story, and Harry says as much when he finally appears, but he also wonders aloud how much of it's true. Based on how it's presented, I think we're supposed to take it as factual. I just imagine there's more to the story that we haven't learned yet. Their interaction ends with the mule saying, "Oh, the truth comes banging on your door, Harridan Seldon." This origin story leads to a lot of the questions I mentioned in the introduction. Some of it for spoiler reasons, but also just going on what the show's presented us with. It's still wrapped up in quite a bit of mystery. There is an emphasis on the idea of love. When he realizes his parents have chosen him as the sacrifice they're willing to make, the most chilling part of his reaction is him saying, "But you love me." And just to underline it, this is what he makes them do when he discovers his powers, and what he says to his new subjects as he takes over the galaxy one planet at a time. It's hard to say what'll come out of his conversation with Harry, but a trip to Trantor to give the Empire some of what the Foundation just got a taste of does seem to be on his agenda. Speaking of love, now we can shift focus to the main event of this episode for me, Brother Day's Adventures in Mycogen, which I think you could subtitle Brother Dude Gets a Belly Button. It picks up with 24 apologizing for not knowing Song already had someone in her life. They ask about his comment about the robot, and he shows them the tool as evidence. Song is understandably worried about being forced to remember her time as a consort, something she didn't sign up for, and Ocean Glass assures her she won't have to put the device on. She protects her. If there is a synthetic life on Trantor, it could be the most important thing to happen for their religion in 5,000 years. And they reckon the only way to know for sure is to give Empire a massive dose of spores that are much stronger than the shells he'd been using all season. Oceanglass says the followers of the Inheritance use them to meet themselves, and mentions that some people believe that hallucination is what made us conscious in the first place, which I guess means Terence McKenna's writing might still exist in this universe. She makes it brew as they explain that this is the only way that they'll trust what he has to say, and basically gives him their version of a heroic dose. And I brought this up at the beginning because her shaming him made me laugh, but the implication is that the people down there do a lot of tripping. After he says the thing that everyone who's ever tried psychedelics says at one time or another, how long will it take to kick in? It hits him hard. It overwhelms him, and from there he's pretty much off off to the races. Where does his mind go? The first significant crack in reality is that he sees Song talking, but hears Demerzel's voice. She says, "Did you hurt yourself?" Then he imagines himself trapped in the container full of the drug-laced liquid on the table before seeing himself standing naked in the Imperial Palace. In the back, you can hear Demerzel humming, and this is something that's persistent throughout his experience. Things are blended together, but he hears Cleon the First saying the dream lives on in you, and sees Dawn and Dusk in their spots in the throne room. The "did you hurt yourself" turns out to be something he said to Demerzel in a conversation they had when he was a boy. She was crying, so he said that he cries when he hurts himself, and she responded that he also cries when he's sad. You see him shuffle around some, looking trapped, going down a hall just to end up where he started, and then he's in front of a mural of the dynasty sitting on their thrones. An animated Demerzel emerges from behind them saying, "The history of the genetic dynasty. Your small role dictated by a man centuries before you were born." He objects to this because he was made, not born, and she says, "Is that all it'll take to make you feel whole?" before she gives him his belly button. That brings him back to his surroundings, and Song lets him know that he's been talking about Lady Demerzel. As he's struggling with his feelings for her, you see Demerzel asking why he keeps all his hate for her, and Day asks why wouldn't he, referring to her as his midwife and martinet. This suggests that part of his disdain stems from his belief that she was overly strict with them. However, his memories are also cut in to show him and us that it wasn't that simple. While he's sorting through it, Song wants to know more. They've been spending millennia waiting for a robot to appear to fix things, so they want to know if there's a way they can free her. He delivers the bad news that she's programmed only to serve the dynasty and would kill anyone who tries to relieve her of her duty. Luckily for her sake, she believes him, and that presents an opportunity for her to point out how awful what they're doing to Demerzel is. This is the conundrum that made me think it would have to be 24 that would free her. Seeing that he understands he would have to do it without her knowing seems to be another hint that that's where things are heading. And that's not to mention the love that's on display between these two characters throughout his memories. He gets pulled back into his trip and sees Demerzel in her room. She's wearing a black dress and appears to be covered in dust, but I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. They pick back up with the conversation about crying, and as he meets himself, he realizes that a lot of his sour feelings are rooted in him not feeling that he was good enough for her. We see him mess up as they're practicing their napkin snapping, and it all adds up to him feeling defective. You hear him say, "Even at our best we disappoint you," but then you see that she's not angry about it, she's sad. So as I said, it's complicated. He asks her to tell him a story, and that's when she says she went by many names, firing off Cheddar, Ito, and Daniil like it's not a big deal at all. I have a feeling that book readers might feel differently, since these are all names tied to different events in the character's history. I won't get into spoilers here, but I was surprised that she said Ito in a way that made it sound like a separate name she went by, because in the books that specific persona was Ito Demerzel. I just assumed that was her name in the show now. She says she served in houses and been a builder, a soldier, and then a prisoner. When he asks about that, she pauses to remember how a young Cleon about his age was the one who found her in her prison under the palace. Then he asks the critical question, would she leave them if he asked her to? She answers no immediately, and then repeats the line from last season that the clones had injected into their memories. "I have always been here as I always will be." When asked what she would do if she could, she says she supposes she would make more robots. He takes this in as she would want to make better children, and she says it isn't productive to dwell on impossible things. So baby dude loves his mommy and worries that he'll never be good enough, and when he pushes the issue about whether she would love them if she didn't have to, she gives a very robot answer from a child's perspective, saying that she can't weigh love against freedom. She leans in to kiss the boy, and when she pulls away, he's now the adult who can comprehend the human part of her answer, saying because freedom would win. He snaps back to reality and starts to break down, and seeing that convinces Song that they can't be the ones to decide what to do with him. She tells her life partner to summon the Sunmaster, only to find she already did, and he's there, and he's a character. I suppose a steady diet of shroom juice might do that to a person. His introduction is brief. He asserts his authority in his welcome speech, identifying the tool as something that was stolen from them almost 1,000 years ago. It's more of a reminder of the injustice they suffered at the first's hand, rather than the bargaining chip Day hoped it would be. So while he's made some progress untangling his mind, 24 might not be out of the woods yet. The best thing about the Sunmaster is his staff, which I mentioned appears to have a real robot skull on the top of it. He refers to it as the brazen head of God and says it will scream Day's fate aloud. When I went back to rewatch the episode for work, trying to suss out Harry's motivations here, it made me think, what do we know about this version of Harry? We know he's fresh off a very embarrassing public appearance after spending a century and a half off the radar. The mule's existence led to that, and the sacking of the Foundation's capital that followed. Their conversation after Harry listened to his origin story, which he isn't sure is truthful, goes about how you'd expect it to. Harry flexes a little by figuring out the mule's home planet from the details in his story, bonds a little by sharing that he had a tough childhood too, and stresses that he hasn't dictated Foundation policy since he died 300 years ago. The mule is really there looking for information about Gale Dornick, and finds it amusing that Harry doesn't know, given the way things are set up. There's some healthy banter where both of them land some verbal blows. Of course, the mule is doing his thing, trying to influence Harry's mind, which doesn't work because he doesn't have feelings. He says he's not real in that sense, and then he uses the null field to lift the other man up long enough to let him know he could kill him if he wanted to, but is choosing not to. When the mule asks him why, he says it's because he has a secret, and once he learns what that is, it might be helpful to have him around. This is kind of a surprise. It feels like someone who's making moves rather than crunching numbers and sitting back and trusting in the plan, letting things unfold. Outliers certainly changed the game, but his situation was also fresh in my mind because I went back to watch the scene where he learns he's the left hand kept in the dark while I was making my Calais video. When that episode first came out, it seemed like he was more or less okay with the situation. Sure, he took Hobermallow's name and ran with it. If the left hand can't put their thumb on the scale, what's the point of having thumbs? But it didn't otherwise give you the sense that he might be scheming. In this exchange, he emphasizes he shouldn't be operating on emotion. And perhaps you could make the argument against intervention, letting the Foundation solve the crisis itself might be necessary, but that's not what he says, which makes me disagree with the mule's assertion that there's not much to this copy of Harridan Seldon. It looks like there might be more going on with him than I was previously thinking. When Demerzel returns to Trantor, she tells 23 that Dawn is dead. He turns to Ambassador Quent for comfort, which she provides. He tells her about the note Dawn sent about missing his ritualized murder, and laments that it wasn't supposed to go down like this, with the youngest exponent dying before him. Another unnatural thing in his unnatural life. He concedes that the genetic drift has made them so they're just not the same anymore, which made me think about baby dude struggling to snap his napkin in the flashback from the last episode. The ambassador drops some Foundation knowledge. She was raised to believe that individual people don't affect the flow of history, not even emperors. Still, she acknowledges his loss. Dawn is dubbed Cleon the Worthy, and they agree that he mattered and would have been magnificent. Meanwhile, we find out later that he isn't dead at all, as most viewers guessed. He is in bad shape because his vac suit started harvesting him in an effort to keep him alive. I might be dim, but I don't know what happened with his nanites. By the time Demerzel popped in on Gale, they were already offline, but I don't think there's a solid explanation for why that happened. He says he was floating for days, going in and out of consciousness, and the suit essentially started to consume the heat and energy in his legs for fuel. Then we see the mule's men discover him. He's sharing a room with Beta, which obviously isn't random. They're high-value prisoners the mule is watching. They're on Foundation Station, orbiting New Terminus, and he doesn't look like he can walk, and she's still feeling the adverse effects of the null field. There isn't any further explanation of why that hit her so hard compared to everyone else either, and there also aren't any Magnifico sightings for the second episode in a row. Misguided or not, Dusk and Quent don't have long to mourn because an aide comes to tell them that a delegation from the Galactic Council, the Luminous Church, and Cloud Dominion is there for an audience. As they inform him, collectively they represent 5 trillion people, so while it's still a ballsy move, the subtext is that with 2 out of 3 of the thrones empty, and Dusk getting ready to ascend in 49 hours, they're there to share the plan they came up with rather than seek counsel from their rulers. You'll remember that they lost their entire fleet when the enclosure failed and Dawn went missing. Their idea is to dismantle its defenses and hand over Trantor as a nice shiny object to appease the mule, hoping that will slow him down. And if nothing else, they think it'll buy them time because, as the Cloud Dominion rep points out, looting the capital planet will take lifetimes. 23 thinks this is absurd, and obviously this isn't something Demerzel would ever be able to get behind. In Day's absence, he does a commendable job of pointing out all the reasons that giving up Empire to save Empire doesn't work. The delegates think Trantor is going to fall either way, so they might as well try to get something out of it. And 23 understands that would effectively end not just the dynasty, but the Empire itself. It's pretty good, but it goes nowhere since they didn't come there intending to listen. Cloud Dominion is a bit of a wild card here. The in-world explanation is that they're the largest contingent that hasn't joined the council. Based on the number of times I've seen this pop up in the comments, I'm guessing this will lead to speculation that the great-grandson of Dawn and Sarah's child from last season will enter the picture. But I'm not sure that trying to circumvent Empire is the fast track to make that happen. It does keep them in the conversation though. My thought on Dawn 18's splinter line is that it'll be a way for them to keep the current actors involved after the dynasty inevitably collapses. As far as the current situation, I think Quent's assessment is correct. You can't really appease the mule in this situation, but I feel like the immediate problem with this move they're trying to orchestrate is that it puts them at odds with Demerzel, who, I absolutely loved watching her get worked up when Zephyr Varellis used what amounts to a zeroth law argument for why they should give up the capital. Also, just imagining the internal conflict when the speaker said the input of the Luminous tipped the scales towards this approach. There isn't really an actual reaction, but you know that things are going on inside her. After they've all said their piece, Demerzel steps in to decisively say they won't allow this, and then has them shown out. Because we have more information than the speaker, who is feeling like he laid down the law on his way out, we know this plan isn't going to happen. We know they'd have to pry the keys to the kingdom from Demerzel's cold dead hands, and her confrontation with Gale serves as a reminder that they don't have the juice for that. We also know what 23 is cooking up, and we've seen Gale's vision of facing off with the mule, which Demerzel confirmed takes place in front of the Imperial Library on Trantor. This does add a dimension to Gale's movements in this episode, which the show portrays as this big event they've been building towards, but it kind of gets lost in the shuffle with everything else happening in the episode. She arrives back on Ignis to inform Preem Han is off the radar and gets the first speaker up to speed, while he tries to assure her that Pritch is good at surviving because he knows they have something between them. She cares about this guy. She points out how it's much worse for them if he's alive because he could be forced to give up their location. This makes it so she has to go to New Terminus, something the mule figures out for himself in a scene in Inber's old office later when we see him callously disregarding her cheekstones in the little pouch Pritch wore around his neck. He realizes he doesn't have to search for her anymore because she'll come looking for him, and we do see her touch down there at the end of the episode with the team the first speaker put together for her. This is what he thinks will give them the advantage against the mule. The connection they have as a group through their abilities transcends what normal people are capable of, and especially one individual, regardless of how powerful he is. The mule only knows one way of doing things. Gale wants Preem to take the second foundation and run, and tells him to hide somewhere no one, including her and Pritcher, would think to look for them. It is extreme, but probably the right move. And he brings up this idea of her rushing towards her own end with the mule, something we heard Han tell her in one of their intimate moments earlier, which she says she wouldn't be doing if she killed the mule first. Later, she goes to talk to Harry's statue, saying that Salvor was supposed to be with her. Losing her biological daughter on the battlefield was the fear that drove a lot of her decisions in the first part of the second season. And now that the time to face the mule is finally here, everyone else is gone, leaving her feeling alone. Preem shows up to share his theory that the Mentalics of the Second Foundation have become something more. As I mentioned before, they're like one thing, one creature, and the mule not having that limits him. He tells her they weren't going to let her do it alone. She meets her support team and takes off. She never brings it up that she learned from her mind meld with Demerzel that she's also supposed to be orbiting the ergosphere of a black hole in the near future. That certainly brought the Navacula to mind, and we get an update on that in a scene where 23 finds Demerzel in the Principium getting ready to decant some new clones. She's humming the tune that later we'll find out is just kind of very sad if you stop to think about it. And Dusk comes in to say there isn't time to replace the missing exponents. He says they need a weapon so impressive that it will change the balance of power, which is good since he happens to have one. And like me, as I mentioned in my video when this was introduced, he's shocked to find out she had no idea that he had developed this black hole bomb. I'm still surprised and honestly don't love it. Instead of simply moving past it as if it weren't a big deal, the show acknowledges that it knows it's a stretch. It has the clone say the thing we're all thinking, and then when he's showing it to her and talking about how he did it, it points out all the reasons he shouldn't have been able to do it behind her back. Usually I like this sort of thing, and I suppose I appreciate the effort, but I don't know, it doesn't really make me like it. After she's up to speed on what they're working with, their planet erasing tech, she delivers the bad news that Dawn didn't turn out to be the person that Dusk thought he was. Tells him he was working with Gale and about the Second Foundation, which Dusk compares to his own backup plan, erasing planets. This nugget of information all but justifies his decades-long plan and cements the idea of his legacy in his mind. If you couple that with the scene of him stomping out Capillus, I think it's a safe bet that the Navacula is going to see action. We are talking about a man who has less than 48 hours to live. Another thing I've found a little convenient in a season that has otherwise surpassed expectations across the board has been Demerzel's response to Brother Days fleeing the city. She just immediately wrote him off, which just isn't what I'd expect her to do. I guess there could be more to it. Maybe it's a Dusk and Rue situation where she figures he'll come back eventually, and then she'll just have to murder him because he knows too much. Her disinterest feels a little odd the more I think about it, though. Similar to Harry's statement about using the mule after he discovers his secret. I know I'll get a bunch of comments about why both of these things make sense, but I'm referring to how they affect me while I'm watching the show and engaging with it. And whether that will be worth it or not depends on the payoffs. A thing I do like and makes me feel good about the rest of the season when I think about it is Brother Day's trial. It's kind of wild that they went with the idea of having this culture that heavily indulges in the psychedelics stage a freaking play about their origins. Somehow that works. And the Sunmaster and Day are both a little over the top when they address the crowd, but the show calls this out by having Sunmaster accuse Day of being an actor, which I think works much better than the Navacula stuff because they give us the mask off moment with Sunmaster after he looks at Song's memories. It acknowledges that the point is that they're both hamming it up some in front of the audience. I'm getting ahead of myself though. This starts with the leader of the Inheritance squeezing a shell and inhaling some of those sweet spores Brother Dude was so fond of. He finds out he'll be put on trial and that the robot skull on top of his staff is indeed real. He calls it a skull, and I refer to it that way because we've seen what Demerzel looks like when she removes her skin. In Asimov's robot series, humaniform robots like Daniil are extremely rare, and at least one other key robot character is described similar to this, with a metallic appearance. It could be a clue to this robot's identity. We'll have to wait and see. Day is shackled and chained to the platform, and as the leader of the Galactic Empire, he isn't used to this kind of treatment, which is kind of the point. The Mycogenians are justifiably still upset about the slaughter of their religious leaders by Cleon I, and don't think that being clones absolves them of any responsibility. In the last episode, I was a little thrown off when he said the tool was stolen almost 1,000 years ago, but this time he says 600, which was closer to the math I did in my head. The tone is set when they discuss the robot's skull, and Sunmaster tells Day he'll be tried by the Faith, who are already there waiting. He gives Oceanglass the red sash, which means she'll be his judge and executioner, and because he wouldn't be there without her, Song has to sit beside him during the trial. Oceanglass steps onto a platform of her own and calls him an enslaver, which she isn't wrong, and when he's told to look into the eyes of God and be judged, Day disrespects everyone present by saying it's just dead metal on a stick, which gives the crowd a chance to get fired up and start screaming in a way that seems to activate the staff. Then the skull's eyes light up to really kick things into high gear. Initially, this seems like it might be a trick, just part of the show they're putting on, but that doesn't turn out to be the case. The story that they play out is similar to what Demerzel told Varellus. Robots made it possible to expand into the stars, and humans eventually turned on their creation to eradicate them. They don't mention the robot wars, but they do mention their savior, whom they expect to return to save them, and they just come out and say the name, calling him Daniil. In case you're not as into this stuff as I am, this is one of the names Demerzel listed off in the last episode. Brother Day picks up on it right away and tells Song that it's one of the names Demerzel used to use when she wore other faces. This was something I was wondering about. If you watched my Demerzel video, I talked about the split between humans on Earth and what became the spacers in the books. And it's all rather complicated, so I didn't get into the details. But in Prelude to Foundation, the Mycogenians do worship robots, but they're not fans of Daniil and call him the renegade in their religious texts. The show changed it up, which probably makes sense, and that's it. Demerzel, or Daniil by her previous name, is the god they've been waiting for. They have a whole play and are ready to tell the story using what I don't know what to call it other than interpretive dance when the situation arises. They can just pull this out and do it. When the brazen head activates again, it plays tones that are instantly recognizable as the song Demerzel's been humming. It takes Day a while to put it together, but he eventually does, and we see a flashback to her humming it when he was upset and went to her for comfort as a boy. In the time it takes, the Faith has passed judgment, and the Sunmaster tells him he's been sentenced to remediation, which essentially amounts to being tossed in a vat to be turned into mulch before being returned to the subsoil. Before he connects the dots on the tune, he makes a plea directly to the brazen head. Here he says he wants to atone, and he takes responsibility for his part in the situation. He cautions that the end could be upon them, and that Demerzel's the only one who might be able to stop it, and tells this assembly of religious zealots that 5,000 years ago her name was Daniil, and she's the robot they've been waiting for. As compelling as the case he makes might be to the masses, including the part about how they're gonna have to work together to figure something out because she only serves the dynasty now, thanks to Cleon I's reprogramming, and she'd annihilate anyone who tried to free her, it doesn't really fit into the narrative Sunmaster 18 crafted for how things were gonna play out. While he's basking in the sentence, Day's able to return the tune that he heard from Demerzel, and the skull recognizes it, saying, "Initiate communication, handshake signal." It's glorious and brings up claspy feelings. Day cries out that it's looking for others, it's looking for Demerzel. It feels like things are all coming together. You see that Song is starting to get won over to his side, and there's a mysterious woman in the crowd that the camera lingers on more than once, who might present herself as an ally. Day might need those too, because Sunmaster is not convinced. He calls him a liar and declares that Demerzel is a clone, continuing to call for his remediation. As established by the ungrateful contingent and their plan to serve Trantor to the mule on a silver platter, things are not going well for Lady Demerzel. We find her in the orchard looking at one of the poison apples that got its color from all the robot blood that seeped into the soil that the dance/plaything reminded us of. Zephyr Varela shows up for what appears to be another unburdening session and tries to lighten things up from the start, asking if she's picking one of the apples for her. This is just the first in a string of missteps by the spiritual advisor, and Demerzel assures her that the orchard has already seen too many deaths. She didn't invite her there to kill her, or to try to change her mind about the plan they presented to Empire. Still, things go completely off the rails when Varelis, who didn't take heed of the warning when Demerzel exposed her face in the last meeting, tells Demerzel that it's all good, because when Trantor is forfeit, her service will be over. She can come home to the maiden, where she'll be welcomed back into the fold with open arms, and she can live out her years discovering who she is if she isn't bound to the dynasty. I guess when I say it like that, it kind of makes sense from her perspective. Where things really take a turn is when she says that the Luminists aren't passive players in this. They have power, and this gets back to what the speaker said in the throne room. The Luminists, in this religion the robot has dedicated herself to because their philosophy spoke to her at one time, are complicit in trying to end the dynasty she's compelled to protect at all costs. With that one sentence, the Zephyr more or less sealed their fate. Demerzel says she can never set foot on the maiden again, and we know this is about what happened when Brother Day ordered her to kill Zephyr Halima. Before she says she has another confession, there's a moment where she gives an audible sigh while she looks down, and you see whatever the robot equivalent of her heartbreaking would be happen. This confession is for something she has yet to do, something that reminds her of what happened with Halima, only she says this will be much worse. She tells her that she enjoyed their time together and says it's almost been like a friendship, which feels like a nod to some of what happens in her backstory in the books. Then says she was foolish to think the mother could hold her in her arms before taking off the salt bracelet she's always worn, and when Varelis tries to turn things around, she makes it plain. She's Empire's Pale Reaper, and nothing can change that. Then it cuts away before we can hear what her plans are, but the specifics almost don't matter. We know she was just introduced to the Novacula, and we see whatever she told her left the Zephyr crying. We see her brought out to the memory erasing device by a couple of clavigers. Demerzel is waiting for her there and has become steely and cold, and when Varelis asks why she's crying, Demerzel doesn't say anything and walks away without saying goodbye. It was pretty gutting. On Foundation Station, the mule comes to see Dawn in his hospital room. He messes with him some and roots around in his mind trying to sop up everything he knows about Gale like a biscuit. We know he doesn't know the information he's asking about, and we know, as the mule knows, that Gale's on the way to New Terminus, so the stakes are pretty low here. It does serve as a way to point out that Dawn is spending a lot of time thinking of Gale while he's laid up, and gives the mule a chance to remind us that he's a dick when he says Dawn will never see her again. That makes it feel likely he probably will. But the most interesting thing that happens is that after she listens to them talk for a while, Beta seems to have had enough and forcefully tells the mule that he should leave now. She looks a little scared when he turns to her, but after a pause he says, "Of course you're right." Then after another short pause, he says Gale Dornick is finally here, and he walks away singing the same song he was singing when he walked in to go meet her. This is something we're supposed to notice, and the implication is that she has some kind of mentalic abilities herself. I'm not sure how you can interpret the intention of the scene differently, and this seems like something that will get all the people who commented on my last video that Beta is the real mule all fired up, but I'm not sure I'm buying any of that. I do have some thoughts about what's going on, but I wasn't able to figure out how to express those without touching on some book spoilers, so I'm just going to leave it be. What I will say about this is that the show has been doing a fantastic job of messing with us. And I mean with the expectations of show-only people and book readers in this particular area, and you love to see it, really. It's a good thing. Unlike the end of Brother Day's trial. Well, at least not for him. However, the Sunmaster seems to be pretty jazzed up about it. We check back in with him at the end as some guys with some fairly serious headwear are restraining him. He calls out for Song, who is off to the side, having an intense conversation with her life partner. It gives you the sense that they're love for Daniil might compel them to change sides or at least help Day. But before you can think about it for too long, the Sunmaster pops back into the frame to reveal that he now knows that a robot walks among them. He's seen Song's memories, so he not only believes it but has irrefutable proof. But at the end of the day, he doesn't believe it's in his interest to tell his people that their god walks amongst them. Instead, he gives Day a quick breakdown of what he can expect as hungry little microorganisms ingest him, and then activates a trapdoor so that we can watch 24 fall to his doom as it cuts to black. The Past That Choose Us opens on the vault, and in the woods nearby we watch Warden Greer and her team pursuing Gale and hers. The second Foundationers are using their mentalic tricks, so when the Warden thinks she puts her target down, she's really falling into her trap. Gale appears to have most of the mentalic abilities that we saw from Tellum's group on Ignis at her disposal. And in this episode, we get the best explanation for how the mule's conversion works, since he explained it back in episode 2. Fallon says she's doing what she's always done, protecting New Terminus, echoing what Randu told Torin on their ship before he got a bolt to the brain. I haven't really needed to get into how this worked in the books, but the show didn't change anything fundamentally. It's more about emotional manipulation than mind control. The mule adjusts the emotional makeup of someone to convert them to his cause, rather than taking over a mind to use the person to do his bidding blindly. Gale uses Salvor's coin to illustrate that if the mule changes your feelings, then you're not lying when you say something like, he's not what you think, and it doesn't feel like you're being forced to do things against your will. Later, Pritchard will explain that based on what everyone who's been converted says, it's love. And you hear the converted saying they've never known such love over and over. In the prologue of the book The Second Foundation, which is the one that comes after the one they're adapting right now, Asimov summed it up like this. The creature known as the mule was born with the ability to mold men's emotions and to shape their minds. Gale asks the Warden if what he's doing to her hurts, which it doesn't, until she starts rooting in Fallon's mind because she's not giving up any useful information. Even then, when she says she won't tell her because she can't tell her, she ends her own life to prevent Gale from breaking down her defenses. As she expires, she just keeps repeating that she's never known so much love. Their interaction helps Gale figure out how to scan people's minds to see if they're infected. Later, she'll tell Ebling that she can dig into the subconscious to learn who you love most. In Torin's case, it's Beta, and in Hans, it's her, which is how she knows she can trust him when he shows up to take her to their safe house. We haven't really had enough time to get to know characters like Ebling, but when he's asking Gale incessant questions and making fun of Torin's influencer fame, you realize that the show has improved in crafting characters that you feel like you know. Of course, the performances help, and in this case, a lot of viewers are familiar with the actor from Star Trek Deep Space Nine or Game of Thrones. After she determines that the core Foundationers are all clean, explains the second Foundation to them, all while Ebling fanboys out over meeting one of the most important characters in their history, while confirming that the story about her conspiring to kill Harry is fake news. Gale tells them that they're all going to help her kill the mule. They're all on board, even enthusiastic, but they realize that they haven't checked Magnifico yet, and of course, he's been converted. In the process of being exposed, he expresses his love for Beta when Torin brings up how she saved him, but he also says that the mule saved him first a long time ago. He says you get close and the love gets in. And when one of Gale's red shirts steps up to execute him, Torin won't let it happen, saying Maggie's a victim. Gale assures everyone that since she's read his mind, that if he tries to betray them, they'll know before he does. She wants to visit Vault Harry and promises Ebling that he'll talk to her, even if he stayed quiet when the mule appeared to wreck New Terminus. When they get to the vault, I think for the first time the show confirms why Salvor could bypass its null field. Unless I'm forgetting something, I don't think they ever made it as plain as Gale does with Pritch, saying that it didn't affect Salvor because as her daughter, she had Gale's genetic code in her. Initially, Harry says it's good to see her face again, and she thanks him for not acting surprised since Salvor told her about her visit through the Radiant last season. She emphasizes that she shouldn't have told him about Hober Mallow, or anything for that matter, and he responds that she said Gale was in trouble. She takes his temperature by saying that New Terminus was in trouble too, but he ran away. away, and points out that he could have protected them like he did when Cleon the 17th destroyed their home planet. And of course, he doesn't offer up the information that he could have saved her and everyone else a lot of trouble by killing the mule in episode 8. Instead, talk shifts back to how he saved everyone on Terminus when the Invictus dropped on it. Gale has sorted out the trick here, which I suppose we could already have pieced together. She uses a spoon from his tea set to illustrate how the vault we see is the shadow of a 4D object. He didn't move anyone, he just projected more of the vault into three-dimensional space, caught them in the spoon, and then voila. How he built the thing is another question altogether, and it's kind of headache-inducing. But I just think of the basic example that you see when someone explains viewing a 3D object in 2D. Think of the shadow a three-dimensional object like a ball makes on a two-dimensional object like a piece of paper. It's a circle, and from there you can extrapolate to a four-dimensional object that's a lot harder to imagine in your head. It seems to check out, and I guess we'll see it in action again, because she needs his help to get inside Foundation Station, since the mule has blocked off the entrances. Regarding how he built it, he admits to having help, and reminds her that Calais' principles are embedded in the ninth proof of folding, which she already knows. This doesn't explain why he didn't help New Terminus though, and when she confronts him again, we find out in large part it's because he's jealous. He says he was created as an empty sleeve of a man, and perhaps if he'd been allowed to know more, he could have done more. So he's also resentful. Gale wonders if this is why he gave Demerzel the Radiant, to make the point that his talents were being wasted as he's kept in the dark. He says he gave her a paradox bomb, which we heard her work out in the orchard with Varellus. Not only would it send her scrambling as the Faulkner programming was expressed in pure psychohistory, but it would also have the fringe benefit of making the right hand take notice of the left, sending the message that he wasn't his creature. He says he's just a man who's fallen into a well screaming for help. Gale seizes on this to make her ask to get into the station, and Harry says he'll offer up his spoon on condition. He wants what the right hand got, a body and the whole deal, skin in the game. She tells him directly that she doesn't know how he got the body on Una's world, and since he doesn't want to hear that, he tells her to ask him. Since we know that Harry's dead, we know she's lying and using this Harry to get what she wants when she agrees to do that. And this is probably something that will drive a wedge between them when he finds out in the future. When they come out of the vault, she uses her unvoice to warn Pritch not to give up the game. And then Dr. Selden tells her that there's something off about the mule situation. He tells her she needs to be careful because his story doesn't add up. One character's story that is starting to add up, at least for Song and Oceanglass, is Brother Day. When we last saw him, he was in freefall on his way to the remediation tank. We catch up with him there, where he's more or less getting digested, and it's pretty gross. As he struggles and sloshes around, he starts to get caught up in some suction, which seems bad, so he tries to climb his way out. When that doesn't work, he eventually gets sucked down a drain, but it turns out that Song activated it to save him. She decided that she believes his story, that Demerzel is their god Daniil, and urges him to run away as fast as he can. He doesn't want to do that because he thinks the robot skull from the Sunmaster's staff is the key to freeing Demerzel, which is something he's dedicated to trying to make happen now. At one point she says she didn't free him so that he could just die, and I guess it makes sense to point out that he doesn't have his nanites anymore, so that is a possibility. When he says he's betting his life on this being a way to free her, it's not hyperbole. In the end, it doesn't turn out to be that big of a risk or that big of a deal. Song told him he was doing something great for humanity. He said he'd settle for doing something great for Demerzel, and the Sunmaster said some hurtful things about him being a half-man, but he ended up impaled with his own staff in short order, with the added indignity of being tossed from the balcony in front of all of his followers. While Day's escapades in the lower levels have been taking up a lot of my attention, Brother Dusk has been holding down the fort in the Imperial Palace. Episode 9 is his time to take center stage, and we catch up with his story as the trio of delegates from the Galactic Council, Cloud Dominion, and Luminism are waiting to enact their plan to hand over Trantor to the Mule, with Brother Dusk as an added bonus. Demerzel comes in, and after she corrects them, informing them that she is Empire, something we'll hear again from her, she explains they won't have to worry about the Mule being disappointed that it's her instead of Dusk when they give him his present, because they aren't planning to give the Mule anything. Varellis tries to argue that handing over the capital planet is their best option. Quent disagrees, saying this isn't how you deal with Empire. You don't try to force their hand. And you gotta hand it to the show, because by the time 23 appears as a holo to address them, even though you know he's about to do something awful, you're kind of rooting for him. To be fair, the delegates are trying to make the best out of a no-win situation, but we're more invested in the Cleons. So other than Zephyr Varellis, they're not very sympathetic. And as far as the Luminist is concerned, Demerzel told her everything she needed to know in their sessions, and she just didn't heed the warning. Their course of action will turn out to be disastrous. They ended their last meeting with Empire by saying it was just a courtesy to inform him, because they believed they held all the cards. After they get the Mule on the line, Brother Dusk recaps their offer, and after the Mule says he'll accept it, he apologizes before saying it's no longer on the table. The Mule who'd shifted gears thinking that Gale would come looking for him had been spending his time messing with Dawn in the hospital. He's genuinely surprised that Dusk isn't following through with the deal, because he thinks he could take Trantor as easily as he took Calgon and New Terminus. As has been pointed out several times in this stretch of episodes, with a couple of empty thrones, the Empire hasn't been a key factor in the political equation. But on his final day before becoming Brother Darkness, 23 aims to change that, saying in his last hours he will not bow to a usurper named after a farm animal. He unveils the Novacula, which would have been a present for Brother Dawn when he ascended, but he's turned it into a present for the delegates instead. He doesn't fool around either. He points it at Clarion Station and erases the Galactic Council. Later on, when Quent tries to get him to understand how unconscionably wanton this particular war crime was, he retorts that galactic powers are gears that crush the innocent that fall between them. From his point of view, that's how it works, so he's just doing what needs to be done. His turn of phrase in commentary adds an extra dimension, and after he eliminates all those adorable mini-planets from Cloud Dominion, Varellis calls out her fellow Luminist, Demerzel, for watching genocide unfold and doing nothing. And this goes back to what I was saying the last time they met in the Orchard. The inflexibility of her directive is something that the show was trying to get us to take note of. Her spiritual advisor did not, and thus adds insult to injury when he brings up deflowering the maiden before he fires up the black hole bomb one more time to propel it into non-existence. You don't introduce a weapon like this unless you plan to use it, and the steps that got us to this place all make sense, so that this really isn't surprising in that sense. This season's emphasis on the genetic drift isn't lost on me. It plays a major role in this exponent doing what he did, and 24 leaving the palace when he's supposed to be the one on the center throne. At the same time, this is 23 doing one of the most Cleon things imaginable, so the surprise is that it's perversely somewhat enjoyable to watch. In a season that has featured so many characters turning out not to be who you thought they were, Empire is constant. Brother Dusk caps off his big moment by telling the Mule to take the warning. Don't fuck with Empire. He tells the delegates their homes are gone, but he's merciful, so he's offering them refuge in Trantor, before he parrots what they said when they made their big move. Oh, and this is just to notify you. Above New Terminus, Brother Dawn says he's never seen his brother like that and reckons he might turn the weapon on them next, but the Mule believes he would have destroyed the station already if he could have, so they're probably safe for now. In the aftermath, 23 visits the Hall of Cleons, where they keep all the busts of the past exponents. He reads off their names and chuckles to himself before Demerzel emerges from the shadows. He doesn't think his old name, the Conciliator, fits anymore, not after what they've done, and he's thinking of changing it to the Consequential. He's curious to see if the Radiant will show that their decisive action would change things. For Demerzel, what matters is that it preserved the dynasty, and she can't know if it did anything in the way of saving or dooming them. He makes a point of saying that they were his actions, taking the blame. He built the weapon and gave the order, and this makes her wonder if he's trying to buy some extra time, making her own point that it doesn't change the fact that he has to ascend tomorrow. He makes it seem like he's okay with that and he's just trying to be nice. And since he's feeling philosophical, he says he never understood the purpose of the busts. Identical faces with different names. Are they supposed to take pride in the sameness or the difference? Or is the point to confuse them? It's almost like the paradox bomb Harry gave her. He's trying to get all of his thoughts out because if he doesn't do it now, they'll die with him. He's gained a new understanding of why Demerzel doesn't say much. For her, there's no hurry to be listened to since she has forever, which she corrects, saying it's really just a very long time. Throughout the episode, she comes off very robot-y, for lack of a better term. I chalked it up to the internal conflict she's navigating surrounding what happened to the Luminous, but when he offers to hear her out since the door is closed on going to sit in the orchard with the Zephyr, it starts to feel like there's something more going on. This presents a rare opportunity for her to get what would be the robot equivalent of philosophical. She explains that for many years she's been taking a daily walk through the gardens, always taking the same route. She imagined her mind was unicursal, as in there was only one correct path to take. Lately, it's like her mind is a maze or multicursal, where she sees an array of choices that are beyond what she thought was possible. She's standing there talking to someone who will let it go in one ear and out the other, and will die the next day either way. This is a look inside her mind and how her thought process could be changing, and it's there for us. But it amounts to a lack of clarity. She wonders about her responsibility to discover every possible choice, and if she's required to evaluate every available path. She doesn't know, and it's causing her much distress. And 23 is probably just glad it's over when he says he hopes she feels better after getting that off her chest. It's not clear that it did when she thanks him, and he tells her to wake someone up to update his bust so that he can see the consequential before he's reduced to 3 kilograms of ash. Before we get into her quest for clarity, Dusk has another interaction with Quint, who is understandably pretty pissed. He tries to smooth things over by telling her he had Brother Day's pet lamb slaughtered so they could do it upright with flank, rack, and brains, and before he can finish the thought, she brings things back to his blowing up planets. He tries to justify killing billions of people, telling her she can try him as a war criminal, or she could suck it up and realize that this last midnight supper is the last meal of a dying man. She chooses the former, and they go back and forth over the different belief systems they were raised with. He mocks Harry and his plan to really pile on the charm, and she calls what he did a petulant swipe that isn't the same as the tough decisions Dr. Selden made with intention. It's fun to watch even though it's evident that neither one of them will change their minds. I especially appreciated him saying that the Luminous claim to reincarnate anyway, implying there's no harm there. But what stood out the most to me as she was explaining what he took from her was that I always viewed this character as someone who was just there to be a scene partner. She made good points and showed us that the core principles of the Foundation were still there, even if things had drifted from their core purpose in their current iteration. Still, I didn't expect her story to continue after Dusk was put through the ritual murder deal he knows he has coming. After this exchange, I'm not sure because none of what she said got through to him, not really. So yeah, it was enjoyable to see someone in a position to challenge the narrative he's crafting for himself and rebuffing the idea that he should be remembered as consequential, a word that funnily enough contains her name, and making me wonder if we'll see more of her in season 4. Either way, she knocks him down a peg and leaves him shouting that he's at peace, which is generally a sign that you're not. But who's to say with this guy? He is alone, and when we see him sit down for his meal at the end of the episode, he gets up to walk away before he takes the first bite. In her search for answers, Demerzel heads to the Imperial Library and asks to see Calais' 9th proof of folding. And I don't know about you, but I was thinking clasp, clasp, Clasp. The second Foundation lady is there to greet her, and she uses the I am Empire line for the second time. She gets the forbidden text and looks at it, and then she picks up the Radiant and looks inside. She calls out for Calais, saying that her memories helped build this place, and a different mother helped build the walls, which I assume she's referring to Yana. There's a third mother in the equation, and Demerzel says she no longer has to hide from her. She's looking for answers, and Calais might be the only one who has them. So at this point, this was ticking all the boxes for me. Only when they started to talk, it played a lot more like what Harry experienced when he was trapped inside the Radiant back in the season 2 premiere. Calais even says that silly Harry thought she was the Prime Radiant itself. She speaks in riddles, asking questions rather than providing answers. She makes a point of bringing up how hard it must be for Demerzel to labor away unjoined since robots weren't designed that way, going as far as saying she's amazed she can still function, but never once says, as a fellow robot, I could probably help you with that. When asked directly if she can help her since she understands her functioning, she just says to tell her what the problem is. Demerzel explains what Gale showed her as the probable future where she faces off against the mule. She admits to lying when she said she couldn't be sure it was real, and explains that there was more significance to it happening in front of this particular library, because 5,000 years ago at the end of the Robot War, this is where the last survivors hid. She repeats the line from the story we heard her telling a young Cleon back in episode 9 of season 2, about the larger robots hiding in larger places and smaller robots hiding in smaller spaces. She says they folded themselves into the shelves and cabinets, leaving gouges in the stone floors when they were eventually discovered and were subsequently pulled out. The memory of it got buried deeper as the city grew taller. Because she's the only one who remembers it, she's certain that in Gale's probable future, she must have offered it to Selden's followers as a refuge. Calais calls this a computer's nightmare because of the paradox it creates. She knows she can help the Second Foundation because she's seen it, but she can't be sure what her motives would be. There's a part of her that wants to help the Second Foundation because it believes its mission is vital, which sounds like an artifact of the zeroth law, but since they are an enemy to Empire, can her offer be sincere? Calais' response here is where things really take a turn. She says if she can't tell her intent from the vision, then both options are open. She can offer them a haven, and she can offer them up. And Demerzel internalizes it as a deferred betrayal. And I don't know, it just reeks of manipulation. I mentioned Gale's betrayal, and throughout the season we saw her do things that led to real-world consequences. Tough decisions were made for generally the right reasons that required sacrifice, and lives were lost in the pursuit of a perceived strategic advantage. After he set up the Second Foundation while she slept to prepare for her confrontation with the mule, the Harry who got a body from Calais on Una's world died, becoming the latest in the long line of people she'd lost since the beginning of the series. Early in the finale, she explains that when she was nervous, she used to count primes, and that it wasn't just a coping mechanism, but that she was building a fortress inside her mind. Her parents, Salvor, her daughter, her mentor, Harry Selden, her lover, Rach, all the people she lost form the walls of this place. Their memories are her shield for the inevitable fight with the mule, which she says won't happen on a battlefield but inside her mind where she can be in control. Things pretty much go according to plan. After securing the use of the unique properties of the four-dimensional vault to bypass the mule's lockdown of Foundation Station, she tracks him down to Inber's old office. He's just basically hanging out there with little bread roll waiting for them to arrive, while Gale and her team of Torin, Ebling, Magnifico, and the Second Foundationers advance their way through the station. Her lover Pritch, who she shared a warm, almost steamy goodbye with, split off to search for Beta after a pre-game conversation with Torin. She heard the sirens with Dawn and realized she could leave their now unguarded room. Dawn's injuries prevent him from joining Beta, so they say their goodbyes while he's left there alone. When Han finds her, he's overwhelmed by the mule's power and ends up converted. Everything else in this part of the story seems less consequential since it has all been leading to the one-on-one showdown between the two Mentalics. Torin acts like a tough guy worried worried about the love of his life. Ebling helps to figure out a way into the office. Maggie cowers, and one of the second foundationers promptly gets shot in the face as soon as they get inside. The mule initially appears to get the upper hand, physically overpowering Gale and searching through her mind for the location of the second foundation. Inside her fortress, she turns the tables, pointing out that he forces people to love him. She's seen his memories, so she knows it'll never be enough, because no matter how many people he converts, he's still the kid on Rossum wondering why his parents love that baby more than him. His reaction to that gives her an opening that she uses to slit his throat with Rachel's knife. This reinforces the idea that the probable future she sees can be changed. Through training, her mentalic abilities are even enough to overcome an outlier like the mule who could potentially negate Psychohistory's predictions. The problem is that it quickly becomes clear that this pirate she's been dreaming of for so long isn't the mule at all. The childhood memory he told Harry about wasn't his. It was implanted. And he never seemed to fully understand his situation. There was the scene when they took the jump gate where he mentioned feeling like his life had been overtaken by a Holy Spirit, but otherwise he didn't appear to know he was a simple puppet. As they're trying to figure out what happened, Beta comes in and announces that she's the mule, which, as I mentioned earlier, more or less works. She recognizes that it's a lot to take in, and her new convert, Pritchard, tries to help smooth things over. This makes for a complicated situation for Gale, which gets much worse when he shoots her when she tries to attack Beta. He tries to reason that the mule can do in a year what Psychohistory couldn't do in hundreds. And he does the whole, I'm still thinking for myself, but oh yeah, I've never felt so much love thing. A detail that stood out to me is that she comforts Torin and says that she'll explain everything, but she doesn't convert him. She does try to convert Gale, but everything goes wrong when she has Magnifico play to amplify her powers, and Gale reveals that they tampered with the balladeer. In the end, his off-key tune helps Gale get away. What's more interesting here is where this leaves the character. I've touched on her making tough decisions and the surprising betrayal of Dawn. She's on the receiving end of it this time with Han's turn, and she's not only lost this person she was intimate with, maybe the person that she's closest with, but she lost the thing that's been her primary focus for years. Something that served as a wedge for them in their relationship. The mule isn't gone, but the confrontation she'd been preparing for is. On the betrayal front, Vault Harry pops in on the beggar to cash in on that new body Gale promised him. Life in the vault is not living. It feels more like his tomb, and the show has been planting seeds to indicate how disgruntled he's been becoming with this service position he's found himself locked into. Maybe not forever, but at least for a very long time, and he's not really feeling it. His being a digital copy of Harry makes things interesting. We have some information about who he was, and we know about his vision. Did Harry the architect anticipate this? Is this something he expected to happen? He certainly made sacrifices in his effort to develop Psychohistory, including the big one. Still, is this something he would expect a version of himself to be okay with? In the best case scenario, he wouldn't have found out he was the left hand, which honestly doesn't seem like something any version of Harry would abide without protest. But in a story that explores free will and determinism and has so many situations where people are forced to do things, whether by directives or mentalics, should this version of Harry be okay with serving out his sentence? He's not. For a guy who traffics in predictions, the original Harry might have seen this coming. I'm sure we'll get a better sense if that was the case next season. But the key thing now is that Vault Harry makes his plea for freedom, reserving himself to begging if necessary, and Gale can't give him what he wants. More than that, she knew going in that she wouldn't be able to. And you could split hairs on whether she flat out lied or just let him believe what he wanted to, but the result is the same. Saying I'm sorry isn't going to fix things, and in pursuit of the greater good, Gale may have created a formidable enemy for herself. I found it funny that since it's Harry who is a character that has flaws we're familiar with, I found myself wondering about how he came in and said that he was sorry. He tried to warn Gale that it was her, referring to Beta. because that's not what he said. He said the mule story didn't add up, so I wasn't sure if this was a way to show his time in the tomb has made him a little worse than the original on some level. Especially on rewatch, this just came off as a pathetic attempt to make it sound like he had things figured out when he didn't. Either way, Salty Harry is on his way back to the vault, and Gale is off to parts unknown. While the show's dive-bombing your way through atmosphere action beats tend to lose me, Lou Llobell and Jared Harris anchored this sequence, keeping me firmly in my seat through the powerful, unspoken parts of their performances. Also, Roxanne Dawson, who has become their go-to for the series' big episodes, directed the darkness, and the shot of Harry remaining in place as the ship jumps away was just such an effective way to end things. Not only does it look great, but it also illustrates his isolation and perhaps more importantly, his volatility. And on the note of Gale's tough decisions, it's worth highlighting that she made no effort to rescue her team or even Brother Dawn. While perhaps unsurprising given the nature of her escape, this omission firmly places everyone left on the station within the mule's orbit for Season 4. I don't expect the mule's objective to find the Second Foundation to change, and having Harry Seldon's self-proclaimed biographer, Ebling Miz, could be helpful. Han already proved he's worthy to be on her team, and as I've already touched on, I think Torrens' connection to Beta makes him a lot more interesting going forward. Brother Dawn is a wild card, the First Foundation is pretty much in shambles, and Vault Harry, now likely regretting handing over the Radiant to Demerzel, will almost certainly be looking for payback. Gale's next destination is an open question. After being led there by Demerzel and given Calais' 9th proof of folding as her ticket for admission, Ambassador Quent confirmed that the Second Foundation is hiding in the Imperial Library on Trantor. Gale told the first speaker, Preem Pulver, to go somewhere no one would think to look for them, even Pritch, and this seems like a good choice based on the story we heard Demerzel tell Calais about it. Is Gale in the dark too? I don't think we can answer that question yet, which is fine. The showdown she's been dreaming of has come to pass, but her primary directive is still to confront and defeat the mule. Wherever she goes, that's what she'll be setting out to do. When we look back at the very beginning of Foundation, specifically Harry Seldon's trial on Trantor, the concept of the darkness was established as the inevitable fate of the Empire. Gale saw it, Harry promised to shorten it, and they even used it as a leverage point to save their lives and the Foundation when they were brought before Brother Day, who was Cleon the 12th at the time. Think back to those moments. Gale, looking into the Prime Radiant, described it by saying, "I could see the darkness. It took my breath away at first. It was crushing." Harry, pitching his plan for the Encyclopedia Galactica, had his claim that his plan can reduce the coming darkness called into question by Ebling Miss's ancestor, Prosecutor Xylus. And in that tense exchange with Brother Day, they warned that only Harry can shorten the darkness. Kill him and you kill hope. For 3 seasons, this darkness felt like an abstract, inevitable decline. But the season 3 finale shatters the abstraction, delivering a brutal and deeply personal end to the Cleonic dynasty. Brother Darkness doesn't just fulfill a prophecy. He becomes the embodiment of that foreshadowed barbarity, making a shocking choice that no one, not even Psychohistory, seemed to explicitly predict. It's a twist that redefines the darkness we've been anticipating, and brings with it some of those difficult character goodbyes I touched on earlier. The finale opens with Brother Dusk, Cleon the 23rd, in a moment of reflection, overlooking the Imperial grounds from the balcony on his last day of existence. The artist, previously known as the Conciliator, appears to be resigned to his fate. He might be alone, but hell, he had a good run, and what an exclamation mark the Novacula turned out to be. There's no dialogue, so this all comes through the performance and visual clues. He goes to the Principium to see the clones, something we saw the first Brother Darkness we met do back in Season 1, and then he goes to get fitted for his royal robe that he'll wear during the ceremony that features his ritual murder. The clock is ticking, her name is Demerzel, and she's known for her precision. Perhaps this is a fact that helps soften the Shadow Master Zagreus up when he suggests that he's old enough to walk down the hall by himself. He's supposed to have his nanites removed next, but when he deliberately avoids that appointment, that's when things truly begin to shift. Early in the season, there was a question of whether he'd be one of the Cleons who run, referring to the exponents who tried to get away when it was time to be vaporized. There was also the question of whether his successor, the current Brother Day, who earned the more affectionate moniker Brother Dude, was the one person who was taking the right approach to the coming end of civilization by embracing the void in Song's company while partaking in the spores. Based on how the finale plays out, the answer to the first is a resounding no, and the second doesn't turn out to matter since it made 23 loathe his brother and his stable of animals so much that it doomed him. Terrence Mann has always been solid in the little they give him to do, and there were times during this season when I wondered if he wasn't overdoing it a bit in some of the scenes. That's not to say the performance was bad, but it felt like there was something extra there that I didn't really understand. And I have to say that it all makes sense now and helps make this his MVP performance. It hits its peak when he returns to the clone chamber to set his plan in motion, singing the whole time, and it's incredibly fun to watch play out from there. Blowing up the clone tanks almost feels like a nihilistic act, a defiant, if I can't continue, why should any of these guys get to live? And honestly, I didn't fully grasp his true calculated plan until I saw it unfold. He destroys all the remaining clones, including the ones in the tower that we just saw for the first time, and those provide a great moment when the flesh that is inside the tank starts to come down to the lower level later, and he drains the future Brother Dawn's tank and takes him with him to the Ascension Chamber. He understands Demerzel's directive and knows that she won't let him live past his expiration date. So he places the baby under the beam and activates it, knowing Demerzel won't have any choice but to sacrifice herself to try and save the dynasty. I don't think there's a way to describe the mix of horror and satisfaction I felt watching him destroy my favorite character in the series. I've often commented on how Demerzel's story is defined by internal conflict, and that's precisely where I was watching this scene. To loop back a bit to talk about how she got to this end, which is another example of things that raise more questions than they answer, Brother Day's dramatic turn appeared to be on the brink of providing the ending of her service that it felt like the show was foreshadowing. I discussed his return and their improvised clasp, and she's genuinely shocked to see the brazen head. Of course, she can't clasp with that because she says it will undo Cleon the First programming, but there's a moment where Day navigates around her, directly violating her directive to help him figure out how to activate the skull. The performances throughout are what you've come to expect from Byrne and Pace, so that every scene they share lands with maximum impact. But 23 is one step ahead and nothing can stop him from bringing the darkness. Demerzel dies following her directive, so it's as fitting as it is tragic, and Cleon's cynical use of her programming to achieve his ends is another one of those if the robe fits moments. He recovers the Radiant, saying, "Stronger stuff than even Lady Demerzel. That's something." I don't want to just gloss over this ending, but as I've said, I don't think this is the last time we'll see Lara Byrne, and her skull is still there, and we've seen that's enough in relation to the brazen head. I believe the implication this season has been that Harry gave her the logic bomb in the form of the Prime Radiant, which either started or accelerated what Zephyr Varellis brought up in the garden, that some of her actions look like attempts to circumvent her programming using loopholes. She wasn't able to find an effective way to bypass what she was compelled to do, or even acknowledge that she'd consider it. If you think about her conversations with Dusk and Day over the last 2 episodes, and particularly her helping Day while he helped her skirt the rules, I believe that contains everything we need to know about where she was at the end. I'll have to get into that more when I update my Demerzel video. He's not wrong, and he dispatches Brother Day more unceremoniously, although the scene's not lacking in dramatic effect. Shedding his nanites to escape Demerzel's watchful eye so he could chase after Song and Mycogen ends up being his downfall. The transformation he experienced there wasn't enough to save him or set her free, and I don't think there's a better way to describe what happened other than it was a fascinating journey with a sad ending for a character that I don't think we'll see again. Brother Darkness is not wrong about the resilience of the Radiant. He may believe that his recovering it will give him an advantage against the mule, Well, that and the Navacula, I guess. But he doesn't have insight into 24's last act. Because even as Demerzel has been reduced to a puddle and Day will eventually have his body removed by the palace staff, as is usually the case with the ending to a Foundation season, the third has a coda that plants the seeds for a new beginning, or at least a furthering of the mystery that is Calais. As darkness has the additional thrones removed in what's left of the remains of a crumbling galactic empire, which, make no mistake, is still under threat from the mule, he sends Zagreus away to get things in motion for the transition to his absolute rule. Part of that is dealing with 24's remains, which are still where he fell in the throne room. And as we follow the Shadow Master out, we're taken back to Demerzel's room and the object that delivered hope and despair in equal parts, the robot's skull, which is now activating. Its eyes light up, we hear handshake signal received and negotiated, initiating clasp. This unexpected signal cuts through the galactic silence, reaching far beyond Trantor to a hidden sanctuary on the moon. Calais and her partner, or assistant, I'm not really sure what to call this guy, and I say guy because this mechanical robot that gives off some real Giscard from the cover of Robots and Empire vibes has Lee Pace's voice. So I guess that's one way they can keep him involved now that there's no more Brother Days. That, and I think the rogue line that was started by Zeroth and Dawn last season is still out there. That's still something that they can pull up later when they want to bring Lee Pace back. This is a very brief, mysterious scene, which is consistent with the previous season's endings. When Calais notices the signal, she says, "Interesting, one of us is seeking a clasp," and from Trantor no less. The us here could be referring to their kind, one of us, as in a robot. But in the response, Lee Pace robot says we were told Demerzel was incapable of clasping. The use of we there makes it sound like the collective us, similar to the way Calais answered Harry's skin in the game question, because we can't. This also makes it sound like Demerzel is an outsider if they've been told something about her rather than knowing. And for what it's worth, Calais does say she was incapable of clasping, which I imagine is a direct result of Cleon's chip. She says the signal isn't coming from Demerzel, which isn't a surprise since we know it's coming from the Brazen Head, and wonders if someone is seeking to embroil them in the struggle. The mechanical robot interprets that as meaning that someone has succeeded, and Calais delivers the last line of season 3, indicating that if a robot had succeeded, then all the pieces are in place. From there we get a flyaway shot that reveals their base is on our moon, which I've already mentioned. The season then closes on a shot of Earth, which, if you remember back to season 1 in the conversation between Salvor and her dad, is merely a mythical place where humanity might have originated. Demerzel mentions Earth as her origin planet, and we've seen our solar system on the outside of her toolbox, but average people can't even say for sure if that's where humanity started. I can't say for sure, but I think the planet looks different. You can see the Americas, and there isn't that much green to indicate vegetation that you would see in photographs from space, which might hint at desertification. So it's definitely a to be continued rather than a conclusive ending, but it is a good one, and I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.